I should never have married an old woman like you. Younger women are so much better. I can't even walk with you in public, you embarrass me. If I could, I'd go back and start my life over. These are the words my ex-husband, Tom, said to me 10 years ago. My name is Elizabeth, and I'm 48 years old. I married Tom when I was 33, and he was 5 years younger than me. I was a nurse, and we met at the hospital where I worked. Tom had just finished his residency and joined the hospital as a new doctor. He often asked me for help, and I found his innocence charming, so I supported him. Even though I was 5 years older and a nurse while he was a doctor, we eventually started dating because he kept talking to me every day, and I couldn't ignore him. After 2 years of dating, we got married. I was a little worried about the age difference, but Tom didn't seem to care, so I stopped worrying too. However, after 5 years of marriage, he began to insult me daily, saying he should have married someone younger. He would chat happily with younger nurses at the hospital, but I tried to ignore it since we were at work, and I didn't want to cause a scene. Then, one day, I found out Tom had been cheating on me. The other woman was a former patient, but I didn't know her because I worked in a different department. She was 10 years younger than me. Tom laughed and said, "It's no wonder we didn't have kids with someone old like you. My girlfriend is pregnant with my child." I couldn't stand to be with someone like Tom anymore, so I agreed to the divorce. I told him and his girlfriend that I would be asking for alimony, financial support. Tom got furious. "I was married to an old woman like you for 5 years, and you want alimony? I should be the one getting paid," he shouted. He didn't expect me to ask for money after his affair. Even Tom's father called me, saying it was normal for young men to be attracted to younger women. I was shocked. Tom refused to pay, so I had no choice but to get a lawyer. I couldn't just stay quiet after everything he did and said. The lawyer told me I had the right to ask for alimony, so I let them handle everything. I had heard that getting divorced is harder than getting married, and I truly felt that way. Thanks to the lawyer, I was able to move forward. I was able to get the alimony I deserved, end the lease on our shared apartment, and start living on my own. I also changed my last name from Evans back to my maiden name, Britton. The only good thing was that Tom switched to a new hospital. As his last remark, he said, "I wouldn't want to be stuck with a greedy old hag like you." He probably thought divorcing me for his mistress would upset people, but I was surprised he was already so prepared, with a new job lined up. Still, people talk. I couldn't escape the whispers about how I was dumped by my younger husband, and I felt like everyone was judging me. It made me paranoid, and the stress became too much. Eventually, I quit my job at the hospital. I spent some time feeling lost, but since I love working, I decided to find a new job. Luckily, I found a small maternity clinic nearby that was hiring nurses, and I got the job right away. It was a small, friendly place, with only a few doctors and nurses, but we all got along well. The patients and staff were kind, and my life started to feel peaceful again. My coworkers would say, "Miss Britton, you're so observant, and the patients really like you. We're lucky to have you." But my calm days didn't last. One day, a pregnant woman was referred to the clinic from another hospital. Her name was Sarah Evans, the same name as Tom's mistress. I checked, and sure enough, her husband was Tom Evans, a doctor. My ex-husband, Tom's hospital didn't have an obstetrics department, and they had just moved nearby, so they were referred to our clinic. Since I had changed back to my maiden name, Sarah didn't recognize me, and we had never met face to face. I couldn't believe I was running into them here, but I kept quiet. A few days later, Tom came to the clinic with his wife for her checkup. When he saw me, his eyes went wide. He hadn't expected to see me. I didn't want to see him either. "What are you doing here?" he asked, and his wife quickly realized who I was. She snapped, "Did you come here just to bother us?" I calmly replied, "Of course not. I work here. I had no idea you lived nearby." But Tom wouldn't listen and accused me of following them. "You're stalking us, aren't you? Trying to harass me?" "Don't be ridiculous," I said. "Why would I do that? You're just a greedy woman who squeezed money out of me after I left you for being old. Who knows what you'll do next?" he shouted. He said all of this in the examination room, and everyone heard. Now, everyone knew about my past with Tom, and I felt all their eyes on me. Even though I knew Tom was wrong, it was hard to face the situation. I felt really uncomfortable. "I'm scared. I feel like she's looking at me with bad intentions. What if something happens to my baby?" Tom's wife added to the drama, fake tears in her eyes. Tom then said firmly, "I don't know what she's capable of, so please keep her away from my wife." The doctor in charge asked me to leave the room. It wasn't because they suspected me, but but it seemed like the only way to calm things down was for me to step out. I understood that patients come first, and I didn't want to stay either, but it still made me feel terrible. I started feeling uncomfortable around everyone, especially since I didn't want people to know the details of my divorce. To make things worse, Tom's wife kept coming back to the hospital and bad-mouthing me each time, although everyone knew I wasn't at fault. No one said anything because she was a pregnant patient and needed to be taken care of. They didn't want to stress her out or interfere in personal matters. This made things even harder for me, and I dreaded staying in that atmosphere. With more than 6 months until her due date, I couldn't imagine working there for that long under these conditions. Even though it was a good job, I decided to resign. The director seemed relieved, saying, "It's a shame, but there's nothing we can do." I felt like I was being punished even though I hadn't done anything wrong. Exhausted from everything, I didn't have the energy to look for a new hospital job, so I went back to my parents' home in the countryside. They welcomed me without asking questions. At first, I couldn't bring myself to do anything, but I soon felt guilty for just staying at home. So, I took a part-time job at a local supermarket. It was my first time working outside of a hospital, but it felt refreshing and gave me a much-needed change of pace. I loved being a nurse, but it came with the huge responsibility of caring for people's lives. There wasn't a single day I could relax. Being away from that pressure felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. 3 years after moving back home, the supermarket offered me a full-time position. My hard work had been noticed, and I was happy to accept the offer. 4 years later, a matchmaker approached me and asked, "Would you consider an arranged marriage?" Surprised, I said, "Excuse me?" The store manager, who suggested it, said, "I have the perfect person for you," but at 45, I had no plans of remarrying, so I politely declined. Still, the manager kept insisting. The other person was a 47-year-old divorcee like me, also divorced because of a cheating spouse. It happened to him 20 years ago. In the end, I couldn't say no to the meeting, and we agreed to meet in person, without any middleman. When I arrived at the restaurant, he was already there. As I walked in, he quickly stood up and bowed deeply, but accidentally hit his forehead on the table. Ouch! His face turned red, and I couldn't help but laugh. It felt like something straight out of a comedy. "Hi, I'm James. Thank you for coming today," he said. "Nice to meet you, I'm Elizabeth," I replied. Thanks to his funny little accident, we quickly felt comfortable with each other. As we talked, he told me that he had asked for this arranged meeting because he fell in love with me at first sight when he visited our supermarket during a business trip. It turned out the store manager was his old college senior, and he helped set up the meeting. "I'd like to have a serious relationship, if possible," he said. I had planned to refuse, but somehow I couldn't say those words. Instead, I found myself wanting to see him again. After dating for 6 months, we decided to get married. Both my parents liked him and were genuinely happy for us. Living with my husband, who always thought of me first, was a true blessing. Since we were both older, we didn't plan on having kids. We just wanted to enjoy a peaceful life together, hand in hand. However, when I turned 48, my health started to decline. I went to the hospital for a checkup, thinking I was sick, but the doctor told me I wasn't just ill, I was pregnant. I never imagined getting pregnant at this age, and I had assumed my symptoms were something else, not morning sickness. I think my husband was just as shocked. When I told him, "It seems like there's a baby," he responded naturally, "That's great. So, who's the lucky one? Do I know them?" I smiled and said, "Yeah, you know them very well, they're right in front of you." "What? I'm the one who's pregnant," I added. My husband looked confused and stayed quiet for a moment. I thought to myself. The man I was set to meet was a 47-year-old divorcee, just like me. He had gone through a divorce because his spouse had cheated on him, which happened 20 years ago. In the end, I couldn't say no, and we agreed to meet directly, without using any go-between. When I arrived at the restaurant, he was already there. As I walked in, he quickly stood up and bowed, but accidentally hit his forehead on the table. Ouch! His face turned red, and I couldn't help but laugh. It was like something out of a comedy. "Hi, I'm James. Thank you for coming today," he said awkwardly. "Nice to meet you, I'm Elizabeth," I replied, still smiling. That little accident broke the ice, and we soon felt comfortable with each other. As we talked, I found out that this meeting happened because James had fallen in love with me at first sight when he visited the supermarket where I worked during a business trip. He had asked his old college friend, who was the store manager, to set up the meeting. "I'd like to have a serious relationship, if possible," he said. I had come with the idea of turning him down, but I couldn't bring myself to say no. Instead, I found myself wanting to see him again. After dating for 6 months, we decided to get married. My parents really liked him, and they were happy for us. Living with James, who always thought of me and cared for me, was a true blessing. Since we were both older, we didn't plan to have children. We just wanted to live a peaceful life together. But when I turned 48, my health started to get worse. I went to the hospital for a checkup, thinking I was sick, but to my surprise, I found out I was pregnant. I never thought I would get pregnant at this age, and I didn't realize my illness was actually morning sickness. I think my husband was just as shocked. When I told him, "It seems like there's a baby," he smiled and said, "That's great. So, who's the lucky one? Do I know them?" I laughed and said, "Yes, you know them very well. They're standing right in front of you." "What? I'm the one who's pregnant," I explained. My husband looked confused and stayed quiet for a moment, clearly trying to process the news. "Since you're new to our hospital, you might not know, but I don't have any connection to you." "Even so, what you just said was terrible, Mrs. Miles pointed out. "I can't believe a doctor would say something like that." Just then, my husband arrived. "Sorry I'm late. My wife has been a great help to you," he said, noticing I was upset. Tom, looking pale, sensed something was wrong. "Is something wrong?" my husband asked. "I was just told by this man, Dr. Evans, that giving birth at 48 is disgusting," I explained. Hearing this, my usually calm husband's face changed instantly. He realized this was the same Dr. Evans, my ex-husband, that I had told him about. He knew Tom's name and occupation. "Are you Dr. Evans? Did you insult my wife?" my husband asked. Well that's..." Tom stammered. "What kind of hospital is this, where a doctor insults a patient? I can't trust my wife and unborn child to a place like this," my husband exclaimed. Just then, the nurse returned with the director. "I heard there was some rudeness," said the director. "My father recommended this hospital, but I can't believe a doctor like this works here. It seems we chose the wrong hospital," my husband said angrily. The director apologized. "I'm terribly sorry, that's not true. This man is not our doctor. I just fired him." "What?" Tom exclaimed. "I didn't know he was like this. I only hired him because a friend asked me to. We don't need a doctor who talks like that. He won't be here again," the director said firmly. Tom tried to protest, but the director silenced him. "Shut up and leave. Don't come near our hospital again." Tom was dragged out by another doctor, still shouting. The director apologized so much that we felt bad for him. We calmed down and sat back down, but my husband was still angry. "Did you fire him because my father donated to this hospital? If not, would you have let him stay?" The director shook his head. He explained that Tom had only been at the hospital for a week. Tom's father, who was an old classmate of the director, had begged him to give Tom a job. The director had no idea Tom would act like this and apologized again. "It's not like all the doctors here are like Tom. In fact, the obstetrician here is very good. If Tom wasn't around, I'd be happy to have the baby here," I said. My husband agreed. A few days later, Tom contacted us, begging for help. "Could you talk to the director and get me rehired? If you ask, they might reconsider," he pleaded. Apparently, Tom had been fired from many hospitals due to his bad attitude, and his father had warned him this was his last chance. My husband took the phone and told Tom that if he ever contacted us again, he would report him for harassment. After that, Tom never called again. Later, on the way home from the hospital, we saw Tom working at a convenience store. It seemed no hospital would hire him anymore. He told us his wife and child had left him, but I didn't feel any sympathy. We decided not to go to that convenience store again. The following year, I gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She is adorable, and no matter what, I'm determined to raise her with love and care. My husband has been smitten with her since the day she was born, and I have to make sure he doesn't spoil her too much.
After quitting his job post-marriage, Brian, who now only works a part-time job 3 days a week, keeps dumping household chores on me, despite my full-time job. To add insult to injury, he's stingy with living expenses and started ignoring me when I confronted him about using my credit card without permission. "Hey, I'm at my limit," I complained after dinner one day. But Brian didn't even look at me and went upstairs to his study. Determined to talk it out, I was halfway up the stairs when I heard Brian's voice. He seemed to be on the phone with his mother, Zoe. "Mom? Lily is still acting all high and mighty. I'm fed up, so why not introduce me to some cute girl? It's fine, she's totally into me. She won't complain even if she finds out." I felt like my breath had stopped. How much does this man look down on me? Asking his own mom to set him up with someone else, unforgivable. I bit my lip and whispered to myself, "Just you wait. I'll make you regret ever taking my feelings for granted." I'm Lily, a 34-year-old housewife. I work as a regular employee at a major company. 7 years ago, I met Brian when he joined the company right after graduating from college, and we became close as we worked on the same team. His slightly needy side was cute to me, and I was happy he relied on me, being older. After we started dating, I accepted Brian's proposal and we got married. Brian lost his dad in his teens, but I never got the impression he was a mama's boy, and we only saw Zoe at Christmas. Zoe lived a bit far away and never just dropped by, so Brian and I were having a peaceful married life. However, Brian's actions suddenly cast a shadow over everything. "We can live on your salary alone, right?" One day, Brian suddenly broached the subject after coming home from work. "Excuse me? I quit my job today." I was shocked by Brian's nonchalant declaration. Without showing any remorse, Brian continued with a smile. "From tomorrow, it's all on you to work hard, Lily. Oh, and I'm counting on you for the housework too. I'll help out a bit." I was speechless. "Wait a minute. You're telling me this after the fact?" "Yeah. It's my decision to make." Brian had been working in a different department for a while. He didn't seem to be struggling with his job, but maybe he was stressed? Still, he could have at least consulted me before quitting. Trying not to show my disappointment, I asked, "So, you're becoming a house husband?" "I don't want to do housework all day." "Then how about looking for a part-time job? I want you to contribute to our finances." "All right, I'll give you money for groceries and utilities. You take care of the rest of the payments. And I'd like an allowance of $1,000. $1,000? I exclaimed in surprise, to which Brian nonchalantly replied, "It's cheaper than hiring a housekeeper." His words bothered me. He must be planning to work within my tax allowance. I've never heard of someone working part-time, earning less than $10,000 a year, and getting a $1,000 monthly allowance. But I didn't want to argue, so I reluctantly agreed. Brian, with his charming smile, was very popular. Even when we got married. Why would he marry someone older? There are plenty of prettier women out there. Female colleagues were jealous. Brian must have been facing troubles I didn't know about. If job stress could make him sick, then changing jobs was the better option. I was willing to work more for that. Since he lived at home until we got married, it was understandable he wasn't good at housework. I hoped he would get better with time. But my hopes were quickly dashed. At first, he would rinse the dishes and put them in the dishwasher, even vacuum the house, but after 6 months, Brian completely stopped doing any housework. For instance, one day, after an early morning start and overtime, I came home tired to find breakfast dishes still in the sink, and a pot that only needed reheating was left in the fridge. "Sorry, I've been busy too. You know, looking for a better part-time job." Brian made an excuse while lounging on the sofa. The laundry was also wrinkled, left in the washing machine. Brian, who works a 3-hour part-time job 3 times a week, was off today. "I'm busy right now, Lily, can you make it?" I reluctantly asked Brian as I put the pot on the stove. "Just like I said before, work is really hectic for me right now. So, I'd really appreciate it if you could take on a bit more of the household chores. Leaving for work at 6 a.m. and getting back at 8 p.m. doesn't leave much time for anything else." Then Brian frowned unpleasantly. "I do take out the trash and clean my own room. And I bring in the laundry when it starts to rain." "Yeah, and that helps. But preparing meals alone takes up all my time. I even make your lunch." "Don't get all high and mighty over that." I stared at Brian with wide eyes. Brian twisted his face and spat out irritably. Just because you earn a little, you're acting all superior. That's disgusting. You only got to be an assistant manager and earn more than me because of everyone else's support. Don't you understand that? Leaving me speechless, Brian went upstairs with his mobile phone in hand and slammed the door of his study. Since then, Brian's selfish behavior became even more apparent. If I used the dryer because I couldn't rely on Brian, he would complain later. I was planning to hang the laundry properly. You don't trust me, do you, Lily? On another sunny day, trusting Brian and not using the dryer, I came home to find the laundry still in the washing machine. During such a weekend, while Brian was out, Zoe suddenly showed up. It takes an hour and a half by car from the in-laws' house, so we only visit together at Christmas. I remember being scolded by Zoe when Brian left the room during our pre-marriage meeting. Marrying a woman 4 years older? Brian could have anyone he wanted, why choose you? Knowing that Zoe didn't like me, I wished she would leave soon but still offered her slippers. Then, standing at the entrance, Zoe snapped at me. What do you think you're doing, making Brian do all the work? Excuse me? Making Brian do the housework, you're a terrible wife. I knew we shouldn't have let him marry you. I retorted, albeit confused. With all due respect, I work full-time too, so we're sharing the chores. Though recently, Brian hardly does anything. Zoe's eyes widened, and she yelled at me. Of course you do, you're the woman. Listen, Brian is delicate and fragile. If he collapses because of you, I'll sue you. Yelling one-sidedly, Zoe left. When Brian came back from shopping and I told him about Zoe's visit. Aha. He replied indifferently. I wish you wouldn't discuss our private matters with Mom. I wanted to argue, but it felt like complaining, so I ended up not saying anything to Brian. I'm tired today. I'm busy too. Brian started using excuses like these to dump all the household chores on me and then caused an even bigger problem. When I tried to use my credit card at the grocery store on the way home from work, the payment was inexplicably declined. Shocked, I checked the app and found the card maxed out with charges I didn't recognize. Thinking it was a mistake, I contacted the credit card company and found out Brian had racked up nearly $10,000 in game charges and brand clothing purchases. He remembered the PIN I gave him when we bought an appliance and used it without permission. I couldn't overlook this and confronted Brian as soon as I got home. Why are you using my credit card without asking? You have your own, don't you? $1,000 a month isn't nearly enough. Then maybe you should work more? It's a waste to spend all your time playing games at home. Brian glared at me with a terrifying look. I braced for a yelling, but he just clicked his tongue and left the living room. His footsteps were heavy as he went upstairs, slammed the door to his study, and didn't come out for the rest of the evening. And from the next morning, he started ignoring me. Good morning. I'm off. No matter what I said, Brian would not even glance at me, sitting on the sofa and fiddling with his mobile phone. When I rushed to make and serve dinner, he would eat while laughing at videos on his phone, leaving his dirty dishes on the table before going to take a shower. And so, Brian would not make eye contact with me, ignoring any attempt at conversation. Of course, he never initiated any conversation with me either, acting as if I had suddenly become invisible. I had a plan I wanted to discuss, but under these circumstances, I couldn't bring it up. Then came the payday for Brian's part-time job. As usual, I put the $1,000 allowance in an envelope and handed it to him. Brian snatched it away and started to leave. Hey, can you give me the $700 for groceries and utilities? I called out to his back, but he went upstairs as if he hadn't heard me at all. I felt like holding my head in despair. With the rent, utilities, taxes for both of us, insurance, and communication costs all on me, life gets pretty tough without that $700. But since Brian seemed unwilling to give it, I reluctantly paid it out of my own savings and allowance. As the days of being ignored by Brian continued, I found myself overwhelmed with a heavy mood all day long. By evening, I'd be engulfed in gloom, seriously not wanting to go home. I'd kill time in restaurants or grocery stores after work, even staying in business hotels. But in the end, running away from the problem solved nothing. If Brian's mood improved, we might not be lovey-dovey, but at least we could have normal conversations. Maybe when I get home today, he'll respond as if nothing happened. Though it didn't happen tonight, maybe when we wake up, he'll say, "Good morning," with a smile. Holding on to that hope, I was ignored for 3 months, until my body reached its limit. I could hardly eat, losing 8 pounds. Brian just laughed and scrolled through his phone, leaving his finished plate on the table and moving to the sofa, seemingly oblivious to me eating oatmeal with a pale face. I put down my spoon, stood up, and went to Brian with a voice so faint it might disappear. "Hey, I'm at my limit." Brian seemed annoyed by me, stood up from the sofa, and went upstairs to his study. I slowly rinsed the dishes, loaded the dishwasher, wiped my hands, turned it on, and left the kitchen. This isn't right. I need to talk to Brian. Tomorrow's my day off, so it's a good chance to talk without worrying about time. Halfway up the stairs, I heard Brian's elated voice. He seemed to be on the phone with Zoe. "Mom, Lily is still acting all high and mighty. I'm so fed up. Can you introduce me to someone cute? It's okay, she's totally into me, she won't complain even if she finds out." My breath almost stopped. How much does this man look down on me? Asking his own mom to set him up with someone else, unforgivable. I bit my lip and muttered in my heart, "Just you wait. I'll make you regret trampling on my feelings." My feelings for Brian cooled instantly, and I put into action a plan I had been considering for a while. I waited until Brian was asleep, took only my ID, and left the house. I stayed in a hotel that night, and in the morning, I contacted a real estate agent saying, "I want to move in earlier." They agreed readily. After sorting out the gas, electricity, and water, I returned home while Brian was at his part-time job, and had the movers take my things to the new place. The apartment we lived in was a new designer apartment costing $1,500 in rent alone. I would have been happy with a cheaper place, but Brian insisted. So, when Brian quit his full-time job, I started looking for a cheaper, used apartment. I had planned to discuss it with Brian, but since he started ignoring me, I went to viewings alone and prepared to move as soon as his mood improved. But after hearing yesterday's conversation, I had no intention of telling Brian or Zoe where I moved. I decided to divorce and live on my own. Brian initially ignored the fact that I had left the house and didn't contact me at all. But after a month, he started calling my mobile phone incessantly, day and night. My message inbox was filled with Brian's desperate messages. "Lily, where are you? It's terrible to just leave like that. I got a notice that the rent couldn't be withdrawn. It's supposed to come out of our account, right? Did you forget to deposit? Deposit the money immediately. I'm getting reminders for the utilities, mobile phone bills, and even from the car insurance company. Put some money in, quickly. By the way, where's my $1,000 allowance?" It's your choice to leave, but it's a problem if you don't pay for things. It's common sense for the one with money to pay, right? How am I supposed to live on $800 a month? Don't ignore me. Brian was the one who ignored me first. I was just doing the same thing he did, but why is he so angry? And yet, no apology, just selfish demands. While I was dumbfounded reading the messages, Zoe called. I didn't want to answer, but ignoring her would only cause more trouble, so I reluctantly pressed the talk button. "Hello?" "Seriously, Lily. Running away from home and leaving Brian behind, what are you thinking? Acting on your own despite being his wife. Come back right now." I sighed and calmly retorted, "I'm not going back to that house." "Huh? You plan to abandon your duties as a wife? Who's going to take care of Brian? Brian is 30, not a toddler. He can take care of himself. If you're so concerned, maybe you should move in and take care of him?" My word. The one who really acted selfishly was him. I explained with restrained anger and in a calm voice. He quit his job to work part-time 3 days a week. His salary dropped, and even though I only asked for help with groceries and utilities, I couldn't even get that. Then he started using my credit card without permission, and when I confronted him, he began ignoring me. That's why I left. Zoe fell silent all of a sudden. After a while, she muttered, confused. "Wait, he quit his job? The major company he was so proud to get into to please his mom? Yes. He quit suddenly one day without any discussion, saying we could live on my salary alone. Sure, I earn a decent wage because I'm his supervisor. But it was shocking when he quit out of the blue.
Well, I suppose. Zoe sounded baffled.
So, for the past year, Brian has been living off my salary. And he wouldn't even do the household chores. If you don't believe me, I can forward you the messages from Brian.
It seemed Zoe had no idea Brian had quit his job. When I sent Zoe the message Brian had recently sent me, she explained in a soft voice. Brian has been consulting with me frequently.
What about?
Well, he said he's working hard, even doing overtime and working on holidays, but you hardly work because you're tired and neglects the housework. He said that you're living off his salary, yet you act all high and mighty, and that he's fed up and wants to have fun with a cute girl to relieve stress. That's what he told me.
That's the complete opposite of the truth.
I was utterly dismayed by Brian's lies, even to Zoe. How much more can he disrespect his life? He probably thinks Zoe will scold him and then he'll just come back home.
First off, I've never heard of a mom looking for affair partners for her son. What are you thinking, Zoe?
I pressed Zoe with a stern tone, and she started making excuses. Well, he says married life is tough, and he's venting. If he gets sick from stress, it'd be terrible. If matching him with a young girl makes him happy, it's a small price to pay.
I couldn't get any living expenses, and after being ignored for 3 months, I was the one who nearly got sick. Besides, that's disrespectful to any woman you introduce him to.
Well, handsome Brian is popular, so even though he's married, there are surely women who'd want to date him. Well, if he were still working at that company, that is. That's not the problem, I thought bitterly. It's no wonder talking to Zoe was getting nowhere, like mother, like son. It seems divorce is the only option.
Divorce? It doesn't have to come to that. He's probably regretting it by now.
Zoe suddenly started panicking. She cares most about appearances. She must want to avoid her successful, good-looking son getting divorced at all costs. I made it clear.
Regretting? How? I'm not his ATM. It's best if he divorces me, then he can play around and spend money however he likes. That's... Lily, can't you reconsider? He needs you.
Zoe pleaded, but I coldly informed her.
Brian seems likely to drag out the divorce, so I'll be hiring a lawyer. Please direct any further communication through them. I'll be seeking compensation for the ignored period and the unpaid living expenses, as well as the unauthorized credit card charges.
Can Brian even afford to pay that? Zoe muttered as if it were someone else's problem.
If the son can't pay, then the parents will have to. What? That's why I'm asking you to let Brian know I want a divorce. I'm counting on you. Lily, please, reconsider.
I hung up without listening to the rest of Zoe's plea. The next day, I called a lawyer to discuss the divorce, secured an appointment for consultation, and felt a bit relieved. While enjoying a week of paid leave in my new place and unpacking, my mobile phone signaled a message. I wanted to block Brian and Zoe's contacts, but until the divorce was finalized, there might be a need to communicate. So, I left their contacts unblocked, without setting them to reject calls. I realized it was a mistakenly sent message. It appeared Zoe, not adept with mobile phones, had accidentally posted in the family group chat thinking it was a message to Brian personally. I decided to read it as well since it was shared. Brian, this isn't what we talked about. I was humiliated.
What's wrong?
You quit your job to work part-time 3 days a week? There was a pause. Did you hear that from Lily? Yes. Living off Lily's salary? It's shameful for a man to earn less than a woman. Mom, don't say such outdated things. That's why I kept it a secret. Brian quickly retorts. Well, nowadays there's something called a house husband, so if you were working properly, that would be fine. But working only 3 days without doing any housework and still acting all high and mighty? Anyone would want a divorce, not just Lily.
Surprisingly, Zoe was on my side. Likely disappointed in Brian. "Stop pestering me. I won't divorce. She's in love with me and will come back regretting it soon." I couldn't help but scoff. I was stunned. Still saying such things. Where does his confidence that his wife wouldn't despise him no matter how badly he treated her come from? "What happened to introducing me to a young and cute girl? That's off the table." "Why? I was looking forward to it. Do you even understand your situation? No girl wants to get close to a 30-year-old man living off his wife's salary and working part-time." I burst out laughing, imagining Zoe's exasperated face. "Someone will be out there. You know I've always been popular, Mom." "If you were still employed at a prestigious company and a university graduate, there might be girls willing to date you, hoping for more, even if it's an affair. But not the current you." "Really?" Brian's response was ever so nonchalant against Zoe's anger. "You can still make it. Go back to working at a big company like before." "No, it's bothersome. Living off Lily's salary and lazing around is much easier." Brian's carefree admission was appalling. "That's not how it works. Lily is planning to divorce you and claim compensation, including the credit card charges. I don't have that kind of money. If a bill comes, you'll pay, right? You have Dad's inheritance. You'd be happy to use it for your beloved son, right?" Then Zoe's replies stopped. "Mom? Hey, we're not done talking. Respond, please." After a pause, the message resumed. "Why aren't you picking up the phone? Don't ignore me." Zoe had blocked Brian. While pondering this, Brian called me. Ignoring it led to a voicemail message. He rambled on in several messages. "Mom has disowned me. Lily, you wouldn't abandon me, would you? It's okay you left. Come back home. You're not serious about divorce, are you? You're just sulking, right? Fine, I'll agree to a divorce. I guess I was partly at fault. But I can't pay the compensation or the credit card charges. I just can't afford it. Anyway, keep paying the rent and taxes as usual. Your husband is in trouble. You earn enough to help out, right? And my allowance too." My astonishment surpassed anger. He probably still doesn't realize he's at fault. A few days later, Brian received a certified mail regarding the compensation and credit card repayment, and, finally understanding the situation and panicking, he sought legal advice. "I love Lily. She's just upset thinking I dislike her. If she comes back now, I'll forgive her." Such nonsensical claims were made, but under legal advice, realizing I was serious, he turned pale. Despite his reluctance, the lawyer managed to settle the divorce after 6 months. Feeling refreshed, I blocked Brian and Zoe's contacts. Abandoned by Zoe, Brian was at a loss. Burdened with the $10,000 compensation, 3 months of unpaid living expenses, $10,000 for unauthorized credit card use, plus his own debts, of course he was. Brian, who had splurged on branded clothes using the allowance and my credit card, reluctantly sold his purchases for cash. Still short, he pleaded with the lawyer for a monthly payment arrangement. Procedures to seize his account if there was no payment were put in place. Unable to PAF for the rent without my support, Brian moved to an older apartment. He had no choice but to increase his part-time hours to make ends meet. An ex-colleague who spotted Brian mentioned he was so emaciated, they hardly recognized him. I hope this serves as a wake-up call for him to discard his spoiled attitude and embrace independence. Freed from Brian, my earnings no longer drained by him, and liberated from the misery of being ignored, I've recovered fully. As a result of working with more motivation than ever before, I was promoted from assistant manager to manager, and with an increased salary, I'm living busy yet fulfilling days. I aim to balance work and personal life for a meaningful life. Come see the baby with him. You must be frustrated being single. With a triumphant smile, my best friend Christina said. It was the same expression she had 2 years ago. Christina and I, who were colleagues at the company, were thought to be best friends by those around us. In fact, I thought so too. But to Christina, I was just someone to be used. Christina stole Daniel, my fiancé, and left the company boasting about it. Left behind, I quietly thought to myself, I won't forgive Christina or Daniel, who abandoned me. The moment for revenge seems to have finally arrived. I narrowed my eyes and stared at Christina. My name is Kimberly, 27 years old. Having graduated from a decent university, I was able to get a job at a fairly large company. There, I fell in love with Daniel and got engaged after a year and a half of dating. Daniel was older than me and was good at his job. He was popular among the women in the office, and I was filled with pride back then. But what was strongest wasn't a sense of superiority, but the happiness of being able to marry Daniel. My best friend Christina also congratulated me. At that time, "Congratulations on your engagement, Kimberly." Thank you. I was so happy because I was crazy about Daniel. Daniel also smiled at Christina. Having friends to celebrate with, Kimberly, you have a talent for being likable. Not at all. I shook my head, not entirely displeased. That day, the three of us, Daniel, Christina, and I, who had finished work, were at my apartment. Christina and I were sitting across from each other at the table, so I could see her expression well. Christina seemed genuinely happy for me. How did Kimberly and Daniel end up together? I was the one who approached him. I even aggressively asked him out on dates. We went to various places for lunch and dinner together. It's fun to be together, and Kimberly is good at cooking too. Daniel was youthful in appearance and had a toned body. That alone made him a fiancé to boast about. Speaking of which, Kimberly, you suddenly started going to cooking classes. Oh no, don't say that. I was flustered. Christina was innocent, so she probably didn't mean any harm. But for me, it felt like my secret had been exposed. As I panicked, Daniel laughed. You went that far for me? I'm happy. Because I love Daniel. I blushed and looked down. Overwhelmed by the awkwardness, I stood up from my chair and fled to the kitchen. I'll get some drinks. Yeah, please do. Daniel waved his hand at me. I retreated into the kitchen and sighed. I was surprised. Christina has moments like that from time to time. She would tell others inconvenient things about someone with a smile. It was my fault for letting my guard down around her. With that thought, I opened the fridge. At that moment, laughter echoed. It was Daniel and Christina's. Really? Is that true? Yes, it is. Kimberly would bring her failed cooking attempts in a lunchbox to work every day. I tasted it once, and it was awful. But it was delicious when Daniel ate it, right? Of course. The presentation was beautiful too. You worked hard, Kimberly. Christina laughed as if she was impressed. I hurried back to them with a beer in hand. Christina, let's drop that topic, please. We're engaged after all. I thought this conversation was already had. Christina said, her smile fading from her face. As she pouted like a child. Look, Daniel, Kimberly is being tough on me. Christina. Just kidding. Saying that, Christina smiled again. I felt uneasy about Christina's attitude, as she never apologized until the end. Daniel's demeanor gradually became more sullen. I have a night shift today, so we can't meet, he said, and stopped coming to my apartment. At first, I thought it was inevitable because of work. But one day, while talking to Daniel's colleague, I learned a shocking truth. Daniel seems busy these days, doesn't he? Daniel? No, our department is slow right now, so there's no overtime. What? I was stunned. When I confronted Daniel on his way home, he looked awkwardly down.
What's the meaning of lying?
Sorry.
Kimberly, wait.
Christina had been listening in from some point and was standing there. She stood not by me, but by Daniel and took his arm.
I was the one holding him back. I started going to cooking classes recently, inspired by Kimberly, and I had Daniel taste test and give me advice.
Wait a minute. I couldn't comprehend what Christina was saying. Fueled by anger, I glared at Christina.
Why are you copying me? And Daniel is my fiancé. It's strange to meet secretly, isn't it?
There's nothing strange about it. Christina suddenly twisted her mouth. It was a creepy smile. I didn't know Christina could make such a face.
It's not strange. If Kimberly had a chance, I think I have the right to try under the same conditions.
Christina snuggled up to Daniel and smiled.
He ended up liking me more than you. What?
I looked at Daniel in disbelief. What was Christina talking about? It was a bad joke.
Daniel, you're tired. You don't have to stick around Christina anymore.
Sorry, Kimberly. Daniel whispered an apology. Before I could say anything more, he hugged Christina.
Wait.
I've always liked Christina. But you were always there, honestly getting in the way. But since you was so devoted, I thought about marrying you instead.
What is that supposed to mean? Sorry, Kimberly. But that's how it is.
Christina said with a triumphant look while still in Daniel's embrace. Thanks for your hard work until now. From now on, I, who truly love Daniel, will support him. Wait. That's not. I felt darkness closing in around me. Despair crept up from my feet. They quickly left. The next day, Daniel broke off our engagement and announced his new engagement with Christina at work. 2 years have passed since then. The whispers about Daniel disappeared with his promotion. I've continued to work, bearing both sympathy and ridicule from my colleagues, until today. Until I met that person.
Huh? Isn't that Kimberly?
Christina. I heard a voice I didn't want to hear. Looking across the street, she was walking towards me. Why did I have to run into her on a weekend afternoon? She was draped in branded bags and accessories. Given Daniel's current position, such luxury wasn't impossible.
Kimberly, are you still living in that apartment? What do you want to know for?
Just wondering. I thought I might visit again. Or maybe you could come to my place. Hey, that would be better, wouldn't it? She was presumptuous. I frowned and was about to leave, when Christina called out from behind.
Come see the baby with him. You must be frustrated being single.
Christina. I sighed and stopped. When I turned around, Christina was smiling. The triumphant look on his face was the same as it was 2 years ago.
Fine. When should I come? The sooner, the better. How about tonight? You must be free, right?
I'm not free, but I'll come anyway.
Good.
Christina smiled, her face contorting as if in a grimace. That night, I drove according to the map I received. Daniel and Christina's house came into view. It was a grand and tasteless house, just like Christina. I'm here, Christina.
I've been waiting, Kimberly. How does it feel, the air of a married couple? It must be hard for single Kimberly, but bear with it.
Don't worry about me, I said, cutting off Christina's chatter.
Then, let me introduce my family.
Christina's face froze in astonishment.
Wait, isn't Kimberly single?
I might not be wearing a ring, but I do wish she'd wear one, though. Matthew, standing beside me, chimed in. Matthew is my husband. Though he's been divorced, he values our marriage all the more for it. Christina, what are you doing? Oh, Daniel. Long time no see. I casually waved and greeted him. Daniel was taken aback. First by my appearance, and then, a moment later, by Matthew's presence. The president? What? Hearing Daniel's voice, Christina also became flustered. Ignoring them both, Matthew laughed. Nice to meet you. I'm Matthew, Kimberly's husband. And this is our daughter, Brittany. Pleased to meet you. Brittany greeted them. She's turning 9 this year. Despite her age, she's composed and mature. What do you think of my family, Christina? What do you mean, what? Why? Christina screamed, her face turning red. Why is Kimberly married to the president of the company? Hearing Christina's outcry, I remembered the day. I met Matthew in the company's break room. When I was feeling down and tired of the bad-mouthing alone, Matthew approached me. What's wrong? It's nothing. I looked up at Matthew with caution. Being tall, I had to look up to see his face. But that didn't matter to me at that time. I think I had reached a state where I expected nothing from anyone else. So, I didn't mind telling Matthew about Christina. After all, it was already well known within the company. They're terrible. Matthew frowned as he said that. It's my fault for not being appealing. That's what everyone says. No, it's not your fault. The fault lies with those two. It was the first time anyone had said that to me. So, I was happy and called Matthew my savior. Savior? Yes. You've made me feel so much better. So, Matthew, you're my savior. I said that and was about to leave. When Matthew, with a solemn look, spoke to me. If I'm your savior, then let me be the one to rescue you. That's how I started dating Matthew, and at the same time, the bad-mouthing about me faded away. I didn't understand why at the time. I only found out Matthew was the president after he proposed to me. No wonder the bad-mouthing stopped. After all, I was dating the president. Why didn't you tell me? It was hard to bring up. But my desire to be with Kimberly is genuine. Seeing Matthew smile sheepishly, I couldn't bring myself to say anything more. By that time, I had also gotten to know Brittany. Brittany had started calling me Mom. And so, I became Matthew's wife. Remembering that, I couldn't help but give a wry smile. Who would have thought Matthew was the president? But now, I'm happy. Yes, I'm sure you are. Christina's voice sounded like she was holding back anger. Well, you are the president's wife. It's not about that. Matthew is kind and thoughtful, and Brittany is honest and adorable. I'm happy because I got to become a family with them. So, you came here to show off. That's in poor taste, Kimberly. I was appalled by Daniel's misplaced remark. I didn't come here on my own. Christina was the one who insisted. You know she won't take no for an answer. I just went along with it. Is that true, Christina? Well, Christina's face looked like she was about to cry. To Christina and Daniel, who were feeling down, Matthew said cheerfully. Promoting Daniel was a way of thanking him for being kind to Kimberly in the past. Yes. But that ends today. From now on, I'll be the one make her happy. Daniel, you're going back to being a regular employee. What? Daniel let out a scream. Naturally. He must have bought a house based on his current income. But losing his position now would mean a significant drop in income. You can't be serious, Christina shouted. Just because you're the president doesn't make this right. We have a baby to think about. You two both can work, that should be enough to get by. I stated the obvious. Though, you might have to say goodbye to those branded goods. Kimberly, you're the worst. Christina was wailing. Daniel started to placate her as if he had resigned himself to his fate. I turned to Brittany with a smile. Brittany, would you go back to the car? This isn't something I want you to see. Okay. Brittany nodded and headed back to the car. Shall we head back too? Yes, let's. I started walking away with Matthew. Christina's crying could still be heard. The news about Daniel being demoted to a regular employee became a topic of gossip within the company. It's not like Daniel was exceptionally talented. I want to place someone more competent in Daniel's position. Matthew said this and then looked at me. What do you think? Kimberly, would you like to give it a try? Me? No way! Really? But I believe you're diligent, and I trust you'll meet my expectations. Thank you, Matthew. I wanted to meet Matthew's expectations, despite my apprehensions. So I accepted the position. My world changed overnight. Colleagues who used to badmouth me were now anxious to see how I'd react. Please take care of this. All this work, by myself? Daniel let out a cry at my instructions. But he got to work even before I could say anything more. Daniel was desperate to get promoted again. Though Matthew said there was little hope for that. Why has it come to this? Focus on your work instead of complaining. Christina had also returned to work. Christina seemed to be financially cornered. The colleagues' response to her was cold. Everyone was aware of the friction between Daniel and me, and it was clear that I was the victor in this battle. There was no longer anyone in the company who dared to oppose me. One day, during a break, Christina approached me. Usually eating lunch alone, she spoke awkwardly. Kimberly, please. Forgive us. We can't take it anymore. Daniel's salary has decreased, and we've had to give up our house and everything. There's nothing to forgive. I sighed in exasperation. Christina looked plain, almost like a different person. Though she wore makeup, it couldn't hide her pallor. Her hair was unkempt, showing a lack of care. This was Matthew's decision. I was promoted for my work, and Daniel returned to his original position. That's all there is to it. But you have the title of being the president's wife. Christina raised her voice. I shrugged in response. With Matthew's income, I don't need to work. But I continue because I find fulfillment in my job. Don't act so high and mighty. Calm down, Christina. I looked around. Christina followed my gaze. Other employees were watching us from a distance. She seemed to shrink, realizing that causing a scene would only worsen her situation. On another day, Daniel also approached me. He too pleaded for his position to be reinstated. Don't you think it's terrible to be given menial tasks by people who were once your subordinates? They seem to enjoy piling work on me. That's tough. I offered a sympathetic response, though it felt detached. I once had feelings for Daniel. We were engaged once. It was undeniable that some residual feelings stirred within me. But that was all there was to it. Now, I am Matthew's wife. I love him, and I think of Brittany as my own daughter. There was no love left for Daniel. Keep up the good work. You even have a child with Christina. Christina always cuts corners with meals. I feel sorry for the kid. I regret it. I should have married Kimberly instead. If only you had what? I looked at Daniel with a chilly gaze. I had thought he was a kind man. But in reality, he was just a coward, always looking out for himself. caught up in convenient fantasies, utterly hopeless. I'm glad I didn't marry Daniel. Knowing his true nature now gives me peace of mind. What? I left a bewildered Daniel behind and returned to my work. I had my own struggles too. The workload was incomparable to before, and the pressure of not making mistakes was immense. Yet, I also felt a sense of fulfillment. I felt like I had finally found my place in the company. Christina and Daniel came to me almost in turns. Both of them became increasingly haggard, and it was distressing to watch. Please! What happened 2 years ago was a mistake. Forgive us. Speak to the president. You know, convince him that it's a waste to keep me as a regular employee. I should aim for a higher position. That's for Matthew to decide. I had stopped engaging with them. They both talked about nothing but money. And recently, it seemed their marriage was also on the rocks. I began to notice them arguing from time to time. Then, Daniel came out with something astonishing. I'm willing to leave Christina. No, I will leave her. So, let's get back together. Don't be ridiculous. My voice contained a hint of irritation. I love Matthew and Brittany. It's over between us, Daniel. That can't be true. Don't you still think of me, somewhere deep in your heart? He was again saying things that suited him best. I had no words to return. It seemed pointless to speak. Then Christina appeared. She must have been eavesdropping on our conversation, and confronted Daniel with a raised voice. What are you saying, Daniel? Christina doesn't even take care of the child properly and does nothing but complain every day. I didn't know she was like that. The two of them started arguing. I quietly left the scene. Soon after, it seemed they got divorced. I say seemed because they're no longer at this company, so I only know through rumors. There's no hope for promotion here anymore. I'm sick of my colleagues. With those bitter words, Daniel left the company. Christina also left around the same time. Later, she appeared several times in front of the company, begging me to lend her money, but I didn't entertain her requests. Christina, you need to manage on your own. Don't be like that. As the president's wife, you must have more money than you need. Don't talk like that. I frowned. Matthew's assets exist as a result of his hard work. It's unfair to talk as if the money just appeared out of nowhere. But it seemed my words didn't reach Christina. You're heartless. You're no best friend of mine. That was the last line I heard from Christina the last time we met. I couldn't help but scoff. Best friends. The feeling was mutual. The moment you took Daniel from me, we ceased to be best friends. Maybe we were never truly friends to begin with. I muttered to myself, alone. I continued to work at the company. However, after finding out I was pregnant, Matthew and I decided that I would leave the company. Financially, we had no worries. I could also ensure more time with Brittany. Let's spend lots of time talking together, Brittany. Yeah. I'm also excited about the baby. Brittany smiled as she gently touched my growing belly. Matthew watched us with a fond smile. Brittany has a little brother. His name is Andrew. Andrew. She adored and took great care of Andrew. Despite her maturity, Brittany had felt lonely with both parents working. She became more affectionate towards me, and I grew even fonder of her. Mom, Andrew smiled. Do you think he knows I'm his big sister? He might. I stroked Brittany's head, who was beaming with pride. Matthew, busy with work, often came home late. Concerned about the limited time to talk with the kids. How about we go out this weekend? Where to? Anywhere is fine. whether it's a barbecue or an amusement park. If our time to talk with Brittany is limited, we should make our time together as rich as possible, I said. Matthew's eyes lit up as he took my hand. Kimberly, you're a genius. Not really. But more importantly, shall we go check on the kids sleeping? With my suggestion, Matthew nodded. Hand in hand, we headed to the children's room. Brittany was sleeping. She was wrapped in her bed, breathing peacefully in her sleep. She's grown so much, he murmured, touching Brittany's cheek gently. She smiled as if tickled, but showed no signs of waking. Surely, she would have sweet dreams tonight. We then moved to our bedroom. In the crib beside us, Andrew was sleeping. His hair was starting to grow in, and his features resembled Matthew's more than mine. Yet, Matthew said, "Andrew looks like you," he said with a smile. "But he has your mouth, Matthew, don't you think?" Really? I think the area around his eyes is just like Kimberly's. We exchanged these gentle words and laughed together. Life had its hardships and unpleasant moments, but I was undeniably happy now.
I've been meaning to say this for a while. I don't like anything about you. We're gonna live as a family from now on, so get out of this house, stop interfering in our lives. When I voiced my opinion to my son's wife, Tabitha, who was neglecting her responsibilities as a mother, she became visibly angry. Fuming, she stormed out of the living room, spewing aggressive words. I get it. Just so you know, the house is in my name. Let's change that. If it means cutting ties with you, I'd do it right now. Tabitha had wanted to sever ties with me. Oblivious, she happily accepted my agreement. She was too naive to realize what she was getting into. She had no idea that changing the house's title would lead to her downfall. This all happened before my grandson was even born. My name is Emily. I work as a CPA and I'm a career-oriented woman. My family consists of just my son. My husband passed away from illness shortly after my son was born. He was a man of strong principles, and I was utterly devoted to him. When he died, I was devastated and even thought of ending my life. However, my son Lucas became my only treasure and gave me a reason to live. He's like a ray of sunshine, reminding me that I need to protect him. And that's what inspired me. My son had always been my rock. It wasn't that he did anything special for me, but his passionate cries for me, his mother, gave me the strength to keep going until today. Now he's a grown man, a member of society. He studied like mad, even landing a job at a big corporation. As a mother, I couldn't be prouder of how he's turned out. Then, when he was 26, he married Tabitha, his long-time girlfriend. They moved into a brand new house and he began suggesting I should move in with them. Don't you think it'd be awkward if I lived with you? Newlyweds and all? Tabitha and my son came over. During our casual conversation, Tabitha answered my question. Actually, I was the one who asked Lucas. I really wanted to live with you. Tabitha, you're such a good person. Lucas is lucky to have you. Hey mom, don't overstep. Based on those heartfelt words from her, I was genuinely touched. Tabitha, a dependable person, is 6 years older than my son. As an older wife, her assertive, no-nonsense demeanor really won me over, but she was also considerate and pleasant. I had no worries about moving in with them. It seemed like it would be a bright and enjoyable life, so we began our life together. Everything was smooth sailing initially. However, things took a sudden turn. Soon after moving in, Tabitha got pregnant. We were all thrilled. Citing health reasons, Tabitha quit her part-time job, and she decided to be a homemaker, supporting the household. My son continued to work hard, and I also contributed while working. And then finally our grandson was born. We all thought, now let's give it our all as family. But then, my son got unexpected news. His company was expanding globally, and he had to go overseas to support a new branch for a few years. The timing couldn't have been worse. My son was heartbroken. I want to stay here. I still want to be with my kid. Despite his lament, off he went overseas. So that left the three of us, Tabitha, my grandson, and me. When my colleagues asked me if I wasn't uneasy about staying alone with my daughter-in-law, I never had such thoughts. With a kind Tabitha and a cute grandson, we could manage. Or so I thought, content. Little did I know, I'd regret that relief. Tabitha had been severely sick during her pregnancy and hadn't been able to do any housework. Luckily, I lived with them and took over the chores, but perhaps that was a mistake. Even after our grandson was born, Tabitha didn't lift a finger around the house. Worse, she would often spend her days aimlessly, not even properly looking after our grandson. Finally, I had to confront her. Tabitha, you're a mother now. Do you have any sense of responsibility? On that particular day, Tabitha was about to leave the house, leaving our grandson with me again. I stopped her at the entrance and took her to the living room for a serious chat. Don't I always look after him while you're not around? Can I take a break sometimes? A break? You're out almost every night. I'm not a maid or a babysitter, you know. I get it. But hearing a baby cry all the time gets to you. Can't I have some freedom? I felt a surge of irritation at Tabitha's scoffing tone, but showing my emotions might only aggravate her more. This was a dangerous path. I couldn't even face my son, who trusted me with his home, if she decided to neglect her duties as a mother. Something had to change. Taking a deep breath, I calmed my emotions. Trying to sound reasonable, I carefully choose my words for Tabitha. Could you maybe go out a bit less often? I have a job too, I can't afford to be out and about every day. I make my request as humbly as possible, attempting to find middle ground, but she just starts laughing at me. Don't act like your job is so draining. I'm the one who's tired from taking care of the child. You're living here because of me, so show some consideration. I later realized she never understood what my job as a CPA entailed. Although I'd explained it when she first joined the family, it seemed she never really got it. Probably assumed it was some run-of-the-mill office gig. This conversation made it pretty clear she thought anyone could do my job. You should be thanking Lucas for even allowing you to live here, so please pull your weight a little. I don't have time to work. I raised an eyebrow at her comment as if she's the one bringing in the money. Our life is financed by my son, her husband. She probably thought otherwise. That was a big mistake. My son's income went straight into savings for our grandson, because I'd offered to support that. The day before going abroad, my son and I had a discussion. I'll cover your living expenses too, Mom. I declined my son's generous offer. Just living together was enough for me to be grateful. I'd handle all the costs, living expenses, mortgage, everything. I let him know that he should save his money for my grandson's future, but telling this to Tabitha might make her uncomfortable. So I had asked my son to keep this a secret. So in Tabitha's eyes, I was just a parasite, contributing nothing to the house and relying on my son. That's probably what she thought. As days went by, Tabitha's attitude became increasingly arrogant, and she started to look down on me more and more. Life went on like this, and by the time my grandson turned 3, I had entered my 50s and started to feel my body deteriorate. I was worried that if this lifestyle continued, I might hit my breaking point. Just when I was struggling with what to do, my son mentioned that his overseas assignment might be coming to an end soon. I'll be seeing you soon, so hang on, Dad's doing his best. My son would talk to his son daily with video calls. My grandson's development was slow at this point. He still struggled with speech. Despite that, he would lovingly express himself sometimes, uttering the word Papa or using gestures. Both my son and I were totally smitten with him. However, Tabitha seemed uninterested, always fiddling with her phone next to us. Talking about her issues with my son overseas was hard, so each day was filled with worries. Then, something happened. I got home late one day, too late to prepare dinner. I thought surely she'll take care of things just for today. As I parked my car, I could hear my grandsons crying from outside the house. I rushed inside to find the laundry undone. My grandson, still in his diaper, was scratching his bottom and crying for a change. Where was Tabitha? I looked around and spotted her lazily asleep on the living room sofa. I couldn't believe she'd sleep while our grandson was crying like that. In sharp contrast to my wailing grandson, Tabitha snored away, clearly deep in sleep. Stress and exhaustion from work had reached a breaking point, so I forcibly woke her up. Wake up! What are you doing? Alex, stop yelling at me, you're too close. As I yanked the blanket off of her, Tabitha groaned and clicked her tongue. Stretching and yawning, she sat up lazily. Her lethargic demeanor really got under my skin, my own frustration reaching new heights. How could you sleep while the child is crying? I'm tired too, okay? Don't yell right after I wake up. I can hear you, you know. Tired? What are you tired from? You don't even do anything around the house. I'm taking care of the kid, aren't I? You don't know anything, so why are you acting like you're so great? Tabitha, clearly in a bad mood, glared at me and snapped her words. Feeling my clenched fist tighten even more with her attitude, I was about to retort. But then my grandson tugged at my pants, signaling that his diaper was uncomfortable. Snapping back to my senses, I decided to leave Tabitha be for now. I focused on changing my grandson's diaper. Sorry, buddy, I bet that felt itchy. I'll change you right away. My tone was night and day compared to how I spoke to Tabitha, soft and tender as I changed the diaper. Yet even after the diaper change, my grandson kept crying. Confused, I then remembered that Tabitha had been sleeping. Could it be you haven't eaten either? Not sure if my grandson would understand, I asked him anyway. It seems like my grandson is frustrated by his inability to speak, as his tears show no sign of stopping. However, in an earnest attempt to communicate his feelings, he rubs his little tummy in circles, making a gesture to indicate he's hungry. Angry but holding it back, I rushed to prepare some food. Once he was finally eating, he laughed innocently while watching TV. I finally felt at ease. I sat down and collapsed onto the table. Today had been exhausting. Why do I have to go through all this? It's all because she won't take care of the house or the kid. The forgotten anger surged back within me. To make matters worse, I heard Tabitha's voice coming from upstairs. Is this for dinner? There's no meat? She grimaced at the fish-centered meal and started complaining. Something snapped at me and I told her to sit down. We need to talk. Sit. Is this going to take long? I was about to go. Sit down now. I rarely raised my voice, but this time I yelled, causing Tabitha to flinch momentarily. Thankfully, my grandson was engrossed in TV and didn't notice. Tabitha reluctantly sat, complaining as she did, and I laid into her. I won't tell you to stop going out or to stay home all the time, but you've been exceedingly indifferent towards your child. Indifferent? That's a bit much. I'm not ignoring him. I was just tired and took a nap today. Being tired because you've been out at night, of course you'd be drained during the day. Why do I have to be lectured for just taking a small nap? Do you even realize the time? It's already 9 p.m. Sleeping is not an option right now. Well, it's done and there's nothing we can do about it. She had been quietly listening at first, but it was clear her patience was wearing thin. Her tone changed, and she began to glare and argue back. Do you even feel like a mother? He is your son, you know. Enough! Stop nagging! Seems like Tabitha had had enough. She stood up abruptly, grabbing my belongings. Shoving them into my arms, she yelled at me. You know, I've wanted to say this for a while. I can't stand you. From now on, we're living as a family without you. Get out of this house and stop meddling in our lives. With that, she slammed the living room door and stormed out. Startled by the noise, my grandson looked anxious. He glanced towards the door and mumbled, Mama? Perhaps feeling vulnerable without his mother, my grandson came up to me. He looked up as if asking where his mom had gone. My heart ached at the sight. I hugged him and broke down. How did things end up this way? Even without Lucas, I thought I could hold this household together. Now I'm supposed to leave my grandson in the hands of someone like her? What should I do? Overwhelmed by regret and heartache, I had no choice but to surrender myself to the tears that flowed from my uncontrollable anger and pain. My grandson must have sensed my distress. He looked up with concern and wiped my tears. Gwen, it's okay, he said in his childlike language, patting my head. His small gesture gave me some comfort, but my tears wouldn't stop. Still, what matters is that he lives a happy life. I can't entrust him to someone so unreliable. I have to protect him. Resolved, I decided to take action. The next day, I called into work and took a day off to have another talk with Tabitha. What now? If this is about yesterday, I've had enough. Just leave, okay? She was clearly reluctant to even speak with me. As soon as I arrived, she let out a heavy sigh and took her seat, immediately throwing provocative words my way. All right, as you wish, I'll leave, I said. So you finally realize you're the problem, huh? She must have been surprised that I accepted her words without any argument. For a moment, her eyes widened. That expression quickly faded, replaced by a mocking tone. But just so you know, I'll need to transfer the house's deed to you first, I continued. Fine by me. If that's what it takes to get rid of you, let's do it now. I had offered the change of the house's title as a condition for moving out. Tabitha, clueless as ever, happily agreed. Hearing her agreement, I couldn't help but smirk. She was too naive to realize. She had no idea that this change in ownership would be the start of her troubles. I took her along as we switched everything from the government paperwork, insurance, to the home loan from my name to hers. Just as we finished all the name changes, my son came home right on cue. Lucas? Tabitha was stunned to see my son, and understandably so. I had told her he wouldn't be back for a while. It's been a long time, Tabitha. Why is Lucas here? What about the overseas office? Didn't I tell you? I was about to come back home soon. Actually, I had confided in my son the night before. He wasn't supposed to be back for a bit longer, but I was desperate, so I told him everything. I decided to stop pretending and be honest about what had been happening. To be truthful, I had given up on the idea that telling my son would make any difference. However, his boss at his new posting turned out to be a really good person. When I explained the situation at home, the boss immediately arranged everything for him to come back, from flights to logistics. So, while I bought time with the name changes, my son returned. We got to see each other before I completely left the house. Tabitha, you've done some terrible things to my mother and family. Just by seeing his face, she must have sensed it. He was furious. Tabitha was visibly shaking, and it was clear she was scared. What terrible things? I haven't done anything to your mother. Don't play dumb. I know everything. Even at this point, Tabitha tried to weasel her way out. Her futile resistance. As I had those thoughts, my son seemed to speak for me as he looked down at her with a big grin. Standing tall with his arms crossed, he exuded authority. The force he projected while looking down from his 6-foot height was overwhelmingly strong. Look, you've got it all wrong. Mother-in-law, you've never contributed financially, but you're always nagging. I've been stressed out with taking care of the kids and said things in the heat of the moment. I didn't mean anything by it. Tabitha tried to deflect the situation, even though she was visibly intimidated. My son must have really scared her. She kept talking, saying things that made me want to tell her that she should just stop for her own sake. By the time she was done, I was flabbergasted. Do you even realize how we've managed to make ends meet? You clearly have no idea. Upon hearing Tabitha's side, my son couldn't help but laugh as he continued to speak. Maybe he found her ignorance amusing, but he looked down on Tabitha, chuckling. Tabitha couldn't understand why she was being laughed at. Confused, she alternately looked at my son and me, trying to make sense of it all. Our living expenses come from my mom's income. What do you mean? I've been putting all my earnings in my mom's hands, saving up for our child. My son began to reveal how things had unfolded, and Tabitha, hearing it all for the first time, was visibly shaken. She probably had never considered that her entire lifestyle had been financially supported by me. She realized she'd made a huge mistake. It was as if her face said it all. Her emotions were completely transparent. Why do you think I had everything transferred to your name today? What? Tabitha looked perplexed by her husband's abrupt question, and from there, he continued to corner her. You thought you'd successfully push Mom out of the house, didn't you? Caught off guard, she couldn't find the words to respond, perhaps finding her silence amusing. My son approached her with a sinister grin. The person who tirelessly held this family together wouldn't just leave because of your petty annoyances. But then why? It was my idea. As Tabitha eagerly attempted to interrupt, my son cut her off. What did you say? Why would you even suggest such a thing? Because if we didn't include changing the title and the conditions for her leaving, you might not have gone along with it. Why did the title need to change? We could just live as a family of 3 after driving her out. Could she still believe my son is on her side? Both my son and I were shocked at Tabitha's statement. He couldn't help but burst into laughter. Come on, let's limit the jokes to your face. The idea of you, me, and her living together, absurd. But why would the title of the house also become mine? To divorce you, obviously. Saying that, he thrust the divorce papers at her. Startled, she nearly fell backward. Though she managed to steady herself, her face turned ghostly white as she looked at the divorce papers. You could clearly see her mind going blank. There's no way I could leave this child and my mother in your care. Continuing as a married couple is utterly impossible. Well, wait, this is totally unreasonable. Unreasonable? You're the one using that word? Reflect on what you've done to my mother. At the word unreasonable, my son's anger exploded. My son yelled at her, channeling all the anger he had ever felt. You were a mistake. I should have never trusted you with my mom and our kid. From now on, I'm the one who'll protect them. We're done as of today. But my savings belong to me. Perhaps realizing she couldn't push any further, Tabitha shifted her focus to the money. She began demanding my son's assets in the divorce settlement. I couldn't help but sigh at her audacity. I decided to explain why I had been covering their living expenses. Why do you think I've been paying for living expenses while Lucas saved his money? What? All the accounts under my grandson's name were set up by me. What are you talking about? I don't understand. Clearly, Tabitha was perplexed. In a divorce, child savings can sometimes be considered marital assets. I had accepted living expenses from my son and saved it as a gift for my grandson to prevent this. This way, even if you divorce, you won't get your hands on my grandson's savings or my son's savings. So you're really not going to get much. This can't be. It wasn't that I planned this in case of divorce, but it sure came in handy. I couldn't help but pat myself on the back. Tabitha fell right into our trap. She sank to the floor, realizing her world was crumbling around her. I bet you only married me for my money, didn't you? My son added more fuel to the fire. That's not true. Oh, isn't it? I know all about your affairs. Your flings have already confessed everything. You're lying. Tabitha looked shocked and I sighed. How could we not suspect you when you were out every night? We've got all the evidence. Your affair partners even confessed. When I showed her the voice recorder and some photos of her entering a hotel, Tabitha had nothing more to say. Turns out she reconnected with an old flame after marrying my son. She was cheating and funneling money into this man. But you miscalculated big time. My salary doesn't even come close to what Mom earns. You mean your mom, the office worker? How could she possibly earn more money than you, Lucas? The income of a CPA grows with experience. So what? She's making like $100,000. $100,000? Tabitha was flabbergasted when she heard my salary. Don't regret your ignorance now. My mom isn't someone you can look down on. But if I just work harder, I could... Tabitha! I cut her off. I couldn't stand listening to her any longer and intervened. No matter how much you cry or scream, you can't change the facts. Stop making a fool of yourself. After hearing that, she bit her lower lip, a look of regret on her face. Then, through tears, she begged my son, anything but divorce, probably realizing it's tough for a jobless 35-year-old woman to start over. She was desperately appealing to my son for some sort of lifeline, but my family-oriented son wasn't about to let her off the hook. You're gonna pay for this, he said. And he did just that. He filed for divorce, mediation against her unwillingness, and he made claims for emotional damages I had suffered, and even for child neglect concerning our grandson. Thanks to that, she found herself buried in debt. With a home loan still to pay, it seemed she had no choice but to declare bankruptcy. I'm not sure what happened to her after that, but rumor has it she's scraping by on TANF. Time has passed, and now I'm 76 years old. I'm living with my son and grandson, and this spring, my grandson is getting married. I'm marrying a woman who's strong and kind, just like you, Grandma, he told me, his face breaking into a shy smile. Seeing my grown-up grandson, tears flowed down my cheeks as I wished for their continued happiness.
Why didn't you come to Mom's funeral, sis? What? I never thought you were such a terrible person. I was at a loss when my younger brother suddenly said this to me over the phone. But there was no sign of lying in his sobbing voice. James, Mom passed away 5 years ago, you know? My name is Jessica, a 30-year-old office worker. I'm dating a man named Robert, and we've just started seeing each other. He's serious about marrying me and wants to meet my parents soon. But I feel guilty about that. That's because my parents divorced a long time ago, and both of them have already passed away. My father and mother reached an irreparable state due to misunderstandings, and they ended up divorcing. At that time, I was 16. And after the divorce, I was taken in by my father. Even after the divorce, my father cared for me very much and allowed me to do anything I wanted. Thanks to him, I was able to continue learning the piano, which I had been doing since I was young and even attended cram school. In return, I did my best with the household chores, as long as it didn't interfere with my studies. I tried to cook dinner as much as possible, and although it was mostly rice balls, I prepared lunch for my father. The rice balls you make are always delicious, Jessica. I remember being happy when my father praised me like that. Then I went on to college. I worked hard in my studies, so I was able to get into a fairly prestigious university. Jessica, you did a great job. Going to a higher level university than your father and mother is amazing. I was very happy to see my father's joyful face. By the way, my father told me it was okay to see my mother, so I visited her regularly. Ah, big sister. James, long time no see. Jessica, have you been well? Yeah, how about you and James, Mom? I'm fine, and James has more energy than he knows what to do with. After the divorce, my mother lived with my younger brother, James. James is 7 years younger than me, and he was 11 when I decided to go to college. My elementary school-aged brother still had an innocent look, and he always looked very happy to see me. I was sad not to live with my brother, but I was happy to see him healthy and well when we met regularly. Jessica, you got into college? And it's a pretty tough one, isn't it? That's amazing. Sis, you're awesome. Thank you both. Let's go out for steak to celebrate today. Really? Yay! Wow, steak! Even though my parents were divorced, I had a good relationship with my mother and brother, and I always felt happy when I saw them. But after I started college, my mother remarried another man. Since then, it became difficult to see my brother. My husband wants me to get used to our life together, so he doesn't want me to see my previous family too much. Is that so? I felt mixed emotions when my mother told me this over the phone. Of course, I don't mind, and I'm very happy that my mother has remarried and found happiness. But I don't want to lose the opportunity to see my brother. Can't we just reduce the frequency of our meetings? I'm sorry, but James is entering adolescence, and I don't want to confuse him too much. I see. But once we get used to our new life, I'm sure my husband will let us meet. Yeah, I understand. I wasn't really convinced, but I didn't want to protest and risk ruining my mother and brother's relationship with their new father, so I decided to endure it. After that, I finished college and got a job. During that time, I couldn't see my brother or mother. It's been 4 years. They could let me see them at least once. No, maybe they're living such fulfilling lives that they don't need to see me anymore. My brother, who was 11 at the time, is now 15. I want to send some encouragement to my brother, who is preparing for private high school entrance exams. With that thought, I bravely called my mother. Then I heard an unfamiliar man's voice. Hello, who is this? Isn't this my mother's number? Are you Jessica by any chance? Yes. I'm David, the man who remarried your mother. She is busy right now, so I answered the phone. Oh, I see. What's the reason for your call? Well, it's been 4 years since I last saw them, and I was thinking I'd like to see my brother and mother soon. When I said that, the man named David made a surprising statement. Really? You haven't seen them? What? I thought you were meeting them regularly. No, I haven't seen them at all. I see. Maybe your mother doesn't want to see you. What? Actually, when I mentioned your name just now, my wife didn't react at all. That can't be. Is James not around? I at least want my brother to respond to my call. I was thinking that, but David said, James is right next to me, but he's just playing a game and not reacting at all. It seems like they've both forgotten about you and adapted to their current lives. They're both living happily. So, could you please leave them alone? I'm gonna hang up now. With that, David hung up. I was so shocked that I couldn't move for a while after the call ended. I didn't want to believe that my brother and mother had forgotten about me and were living their lives. When I consulted my father, he said, That's strange. Those two love you, Jessica. And called my mother. But she told him, Please don't call again. And in the end, we couldn't meet or talk to my mother and brother. After that, I became busier with work and couldn't see my brother and mother, and time passed with them still in the back of my mind. Then, about 3 years after that phone call, I received sad news. What? Mom! It was a notification that my mother had died in a traffic accident. I rushed to the hospital. In the room where the hospital staff guided me, I saw my mother's lifeless body. Her face looked as if she was just sleeping, with her eyes closed and a gentle expression. No, Mom! I hadn't seen my mother in 7 years. I never thought I would meet her again like this. Sis? James! As I was mourning my mother's death, my brother came into the room. My brother, whom I hadn't seen in 7 years, had grown up completely. It's been a long time. Why didn't you come to see us? What? Did you start hating me and Mom? Wait a minute. It was your stepfather, David, who told me not to see you. Dad? Dad would never say something like that. What? Dad's an amazing person, and I look up to him. So he wouldn't say something like not meeting with you, sis. What? My brother seemed to trust our stepfather, David, quite a bit. They must have formed a strong bond over these 7 years. Then, a man who appeared to be David arrived. Hi, it's our first time meeting in person, isn't it? Hello. David was a man in his early 50s, with an ambitious look about him, like someone who could really get things done. I've seen various company employees in my work, and somehow he gave me the impression of being a bit cunning. I'm really shocked that my wife passed away so suddenly. The funeral will be held soon, so I'd like both you and your father to attend, Jessica. Understood. There were many things on my mind, but the priority was my mother's funeral. My father and I attended my mother's funeral together and saw her off. The funeral went without incident, but there was a dispute over the inheritance. Jessica hasn't seen my wife in 7 years. So, could you please give up the inheritance? What? Wait a minute. Wasn't it David who didn't let me see her? As I said that, my brother interrupted. Sis, are you still saying that? How many times do I have to explain that Dad would never do that? James, believe me, your stepfather told me not to see you and Mom anymore. He told me to leave you alone. No matter how desperately I pleaded, my brother wouldn't believe me. Oh dear, it seems I've become the villain here. Dad's not wrong. Sis is just saying weird things. James! Sis, I don't really understand inheritance, but will you give it up? What? I should at least receive the minimum inheritance, right? What would Mom think if she saw you being so greedy about money? David treated me as if I were money grubbing. Then, my father stepped in. Wait a minute. My daughter is only claiming her rightful share. Stop making such accusations. Thanks to my father's words, David closed his mouth. No matter what you say, I'll make sure my daughter gets at least the minimum inheritance. What's this? Are you and Sis conspiring to make things difficult for us? That's not the case. This is just a claim of rights. The discussion was difficult, and in the end, I was able to receive only the minimum inheritance, but a rift formed between my brother and me. It was because I had become antagonistic with David, my brother's trusted stepfather. I had finally seen my brother after so long, only to be disliked by him. Losing my mother was sad enough, and this made it even harder mentally. And then, more misfortune struck me. My father was diagnosed with cancer. He was given only 1 more year to live. I felt like I was being crushed by repeated misfortunes. Why is this happening to me? I became quite negative. But my father, noticing my change, spoke to me gently. Jessica, everyone dies someday. It's not something we can control. I've been happy living with you all this time, and I intend to enjoy the time I have left to the fullest. Dad. After that, my father and I went on trips and did everything he wanted to do before he passed away. Losing both of my beloved parents was incredibly painful. But my father's last words were, "Look forward and enjoy every moment of life." So I wiped away my tears and chose to move on. My brother came to my father's funeral, but he brought David with him. Because of that, my brother was aggressive towards me, and all he talked about was my father's inheritance. Sis, you forcibly took part of Mom's inheritance, so I'm definitely taking Dad's inheritance. I didn't want to fight or be hostile anymore, so I quietly agreed. Yes, of course. I was planning to give it to you anyway. I said that and made arrangements for the inheritance to be transferred to my brother. I haven't seen my brother since then. He hasn't contacted me, and I felt awkward reaching out to him. A few years passed, and I met Robert through a friend's introduction. He was considering marriage, and I decided to tell him everything. That both my parents were gone, and that I was almost estranged from my only sibling, my brother. Robert listened to everything and still wanted to marry me. I fell in love with him. We continued to date smoothly and received a marriage proposal. This must be what it feels like to be on top of the world. But at the moment, I suddenly received a call from my brother. Hello, James? It's been a while, hasn't it? What's up? Oh, speaking of which, I have something to tell you too. I was so happy to hear from my brother after so long that I started talking rapidly. Then, my brother interrupted me with something incomprehensible. Sis, why didn't you come to Mom's funeral? I never thought you were such a terrible person. What? I didn't think my sister was such a terrible person. I was confused by my brother's sudden accusation over the phone. What's going on? Why are you saying something so nonsensical all of a sudden? Nonsensical? Mom's dead, you know. Wait, James. Calm down. How can I calm down? Was this some kind of cruel joke? No, it was too harsh for that. But there was no hint of lying in my sobbing brother's voice. I took a deep breath and calmed myself, and spoke slowly to my brother. James, Mom died 5 years ago. Then my brother's shocking reply came. What are you talking about? Mom didn't die back then. What? What are you talking about? You saw Mom's body too, didn't you? And we even had the funeral. I couldn't understand why my brother was saying such things. No. Mom was alive. I lived with her for about 3 years after that. What? What do you mean? So I was living with Mom. I really couldn't understand what my brother was saying. Mom was alive? It's best to go along with the story at times like this. Yes, but they said she would die soon without an offering. I gave all the money I earned as an offering. What? At that moment, I realized that my brother had been deceived. But the offering wasn't enough, and Mom died. James, can you introduce me to the person you've been making offerings to? Of course. You should be saved too, sis. That person found where Mom was and rescued her. James. Later, I went with my brother to meet the person he had been making offerings to. The place was in a regular office building, where counseling was conducted. If you counsel with the teacher, he'll solve any problem for you. Teacher? When my brother led me into a private office, David was there. Why are you... Oh, if it isn't Jessica. Wait a minute. You're the one who remarried my mother and became James's stepfather, right? Why is James calling you teacher? James and I have a patient-teacher relationship. What? No, you lived with James, right? James even called you Dad. Sis, what are you talking about? David is a counselor. Dad died 3 years ago, remember? Wait, David, are you brainwashing James? What are you talking about? I've just been listening to him. Before that, I was counseling his mother. What? You deceived my mother too? Sis, don't say such terrible things like deceived. James! Jessica seems quite confused. Well, it's understandable. Losing both parents can often lead to mental illness. What are you talking about? You've unconsciously put a stopper in your mind to avoid facing reality. You're suppressing the grief of losing your parents. I can help you release it. Stop it! I'm already looking forward and living my life. Really? Aren't you just enduring it? I'm not enduring anything. It's better not to force yourself. If you do as I say, your heart will feel much lighter. Really? Really. James became cheerful that way too. So why not entrust yourself to me? Yes, please. Good girl. Now sit here and think about your mom and dad. When I place my hands on your head, the sad feelings will magically disappear. How about it? Do you feel lighter? No, I don't feel any lighter. I see. Maybe it's because the offering is 0, so there's not enough power. What? If you really want to get better, you have to make a lot of offerings. Is that so? Yeah. So let's start with an offering of $1,000. $1,000? That's still not enough to be completely healed. You need to make more and more offerings. Is that so? James made offerings too, right? Yes, he's been making offerings ever since he graduated from high school and started working. That's how he was able to find his mother and regain happy days. But the offerings stopped at one point, and his mother really died this time. So he's reflecting on that and increasing his offerings to be saved. I see. I called out towards the entrance. That's how it is. Robert." As I said that, the door to the room opened, and my fiancé Robert walked in. "Who exactly are you?" David asked with a suspicious look at Robert, who then handed David his business card. "I'm a lawyer. I've been listening to your conversation, and it seems you've been brainwashing James and swindling a large sum of money from him." "A lawyer?" "He's also my fiancé, and we're gonna sue you and recover the money." As I said that, David momentarily looked flustered, but then snorted and retorted. "I thought you'd say something like that. James was saved by me. There's no fact that I deceived him. I was just providing legitimate counseling. Right, James?" David asked my brother with a triumphant look on his face. My brother glanced at us and then said, "I was deceived by you and forced to contribute a large sum of money." James, you..." David's eyes widened at my brother's statement. "It seems your brother intends to sue you." Wait, this must be some mistake, right? James, I saved you. Are you gonna betray me like this? Teacher, I do think that thanks to you, both my mother and I felt relieved many times. But it's also true that you were gradually brainwashing us, right? In fact, I became unable to make sound judgments because of you. You brought a woman who looked like my mother and made me believe that she was actually alive. And then you instilled fear that she would die if I didn't make offerings. Moreover, you disposed of all the photos of my mother and me without my noticing and replaced them with composite photos of a fake mother. The pictures were so sophisticated and natural that I naturally believed the fake mother was my real mother. And before I knew it, almost all of my salary from the years since I graduated from high school and started working was taken by you. When I met my sister and saw the real photos of my mother, the brainwashing suddenly broke. That's when I decided to sue you, capturing evidence of you actually demanding an exorbitant amount of money. You betrayed me! Don't mess with me. You're the one who kept swindling money from me and my mother. You brainwashed us, telling us not to meet my sister and even made us lie that you were our stepfather. My mother died without seeing my sister for years. I'll not only get back the money you took from me, but also the money you took from my mother. You've sucked money from us and enjoyed yourself. Now suffer misfortune. My brother angrily confronted David with such intensity that David stumbled back in surprise. Then we'll see you in court, Robert said, and we left the scene. After that, James sued David under Robert's legal representation. David was offered to pay back the total amount of $300,000 that he had swindled from my brother and mother. Not only was David offered to pay compensation, but his outrageous fraudulence became known to his previous patients and their families, and he seems to be in serious trouble due to lawsuits and compensation claims from many people. But he had been doing as he pleased for so long that he deserved to be punished. I realized that our relationship had been strained because of the brainwashing, and with everything resolved, the resentment between my brother and me disappeared. My brother also attended my wedding with Robert. I hadn't seen my brother for many years because of David, but now I want to fill that gap by regularly meeting and getting along well with my only sibling.
I'm sick of your wasteful spending. Seriously, What a terrible wife you are. Just dump her already. My name is Yolanda. I'm 31. My husband, Keith, is 3 years younger than me, at 28. I work part-time 3 days a week at a local coffee shop. Keith's family home is a 15-minute walk away. On the other hand, my family home is a plane ride away. Keith's brother Richard lives with his parents in the family home. Keith's mother, Yasmin, seems to adore Richard and hardly pays any attention to us. As a wife, I'm thankful for that distance. But Keith, being the younger son, seems to have a complex about not being the favored child like Richard is. I'm not as expected as Richard, Keith once told me out of the blue. Richard appears more accomplished compared to Keith, but I love Keith's earnest and honest nature. Despite his occasional anxiousness, one night, a call came from Keith's family's home to his mobile phone. The details were unclear, but apparently, Richard had suddenly left the house. I was surprised, since I always thought Richard and his parents got along well. I asked Keith about it, but he didn't reveal anything. Days passed, without clarity, and then Keith said, "We should save more, considering a home of our own and future kids." Until now, I had been using more than half of my part-time salary of $700 as discretionary money. I'm not one for frivolous spending. But indeed, at this rate, a house was a distant future. After discussion, meticulous Keith, better with numbers, took over the finances. The part-time income went entirely to savings. Keith would give me a monthly allowance for personal use. However, I was dissatisfied with the amount. Keith suggested I manage with just $10 a month. Naturally, I objected to this elementary school level allowance. But I reluctantly agreed after Keith said, "I'll work on increasing my income. So let's set a goal and work towards it together." As expected, it was tough. Spending even $1 made me anxious. But I kept reminding myself for our future home, for when we have kids. After 3 months of this lifestyle, Keith's behavior began to change. He scolded me for wasteful spending whenever he saw a coffee cup in the trash. It was just a $2 coffee from the convenience store. A little luxury after days of restraint. When I bought ready-made meals, he'd say, "You wouldn't need this if you cooked properly." Around the same time, Keith's parents began visiting on weekends. Yasmin's change in attitude from being glued to Richard to frequent visits felt odd, even repulsive, but Keith seemed happy. Every weekend, Yasmin would make snide remarks. "Aren't you capable of decent hospitality when your husband's mom visits? Useless." Or, "Still no grandchildren? Living off Keith's earnings and not contributing anything?" Whenever children were mentioned, Keith's father, Yancey, would say inappropriately, "Having trouble? Should I give it a try?" with a leering smile. Yasmin would then glare at me as if annoyed. Sometimes she would even throw away my cooking, claiming, "Such poor food doesn't suit my taste." Keith did nothing but lightly laugh, even in the face of her harsh words. I was shrinking under the constant verbal abuse and Keith's intimidating gaze. I can't do anything if I leave here without financial means. If I just endure, I can keep this life. That's what I had come to believe. I was numbing myself. Then one day, an invitation for lunch came from Renee, a colleague from my office days. She was my closest friend, and I was happy to hear from her. Timidly, I told Keith I wanted to go, but he dismissed it outright. "I'm not wasting money on such frivolity. living such an easy life and doing as you please. I'm staying at my parents' tonight. Think about what you've done." He left after saying that. I stood there, listless, when Renee called me again. "It's been a while. Are you okay? Busy?" I hadn't heard Renee's voice in such a long time. It was cheerful. The moment I heard it, tears overflowed in my eyes, which I thought had become numb. "What's wrong? What happened?" Renee seemed surprised to hear me crying, but I couldn't speak. I could only cry. "Anyway, let's meet up tomorrow, okay? Definitely." "Yeah," I managed to reply and hung up the phone. It had been a long time since I went out, other than my part-time job and shopping. It's been so long. Renee looked as vibrant and beautiful as ever. Suddenly, I felt shabby in comparison. "What happened? Are you okay?" Renee asked, looking surprised to see me. Catching my reflection in the glass, I saw myself in wrinkled clothes, thin and aged. Without answering, Renee suggested we go to a family restaurant, saying it was just for the time being. "What will you have?" Renee opened the menu, but I only ordered from the drink bar. However, meals for two were brought to our table. Renee put a knife and fork in front of me. "Eat first. We'll talk after." The meal felt warmer than what I ate at home, and I almost cried. So, what happened? Well, I told Renee everything that had happened. Renee was speechless. After a moment of silence, she took out several $100 bills from her wallet and pressed them into my hand. "What? Wait." Confused, I heard Renee repeatedly say, "Listen, buy a digital voice recorder with this money. Then call your parents and tell them honestly about the situation. Got it? You can do it, right? Also, have you checked the paper statements? Do you know how much is saved?" I shook my head, and Renee sighed deeply before speaking firmly. "Get a grip. You're not at fault here." Renee held my hands. "But I can't accept this." When I protested, Renee smiled. "I'm not giving this to you. It's just a loan. When you get yourself back on track, you'll pay me back." Her words woke me up. "Thank you." I squeezed her hand in return. What are we two women doing here? I laughed for the first time in a long while at Renee's words. With a newfound clarity from Renee's words, I bought a digital recorder. When I got home, I immediately pulled out the paper statements from the drawer where I kept valuables. Looking at them, I nearly fainted. For several months, tens of thousands of dollars had been withdrawn, leaving a meager balance. What is this? I was on the verge of panic, but tried to keep my sanity. Then the front door opened. Even though it was before sunset, Keith returned home with Yasmin. I quickly pocketed the paper statement and headed to the living room. Before I could greet them, Keith, seeing my unusual attire, yelled, "Where have you been?" Startled by his gaze, I quietly pressed the switch on the digital voice recorder in my pocket. "I went to a family restaurant with Renee, a friend I haven't seen in a while." Keith, infuriated by my reply, slammed his bag on the floor. "A family restaurant? Don't mess around. Don't waste the money I earn," he yelled even louder. Behind him, Yasmin sneered. "Your wife is a terrible spendthrift, isn't she?" Looking calmly at Keith and Yasmin, I held on to the paper statement. "What's this about? How do you spend so much money in such a short period of time?" Keith faltered for a moment, then brazenly began to speak, satisfied. He had been spending on Yasmin's luxury brands, Yancey's car, and their trips. The Keith in front of me seemed like a stranger. The Keith I loved was nowhere to be found. What? All of this for Yancey and Yasmin? Was the talk about saving for our home, for our kids, all a lie? Anger welled up inside of me. The miserable and humiliating feelings of the past months resurfaced, and I glared at Keith. "What's with that look? I'm not in the wrong. I'm the one feeding you with my money, so don't you dare speak up." He yelled and slapped me across the face. I stumbled, hitting my elbow on the corner of the table. Watching me, Yasmin sneered. "That's right. Complaining about my precious son? A worthless wife who's nothing but a burden. Keith, you should get rid of such a wife." Holding my cheek, I slowly stood up and said, "Understood," then left the house. I stayed in a business hotel with the remainder of the money I borrowed from Renee and called my parents. They were shocked to hear my story and promised to come right away. I called Renee to thank her and to let her know I would confront Keith and his parents tomorrow. The next day, my parents arrived on the first morning flight. Seeing my swollen face, Mom burst into tears. Dad was furious after hearing the story. I felt somewhat guilty. We then visited the hotel and the courthouse before heading to Keith's family home. Keith and his parents were waiting for us there. "What do you mean by staying out overnight? I won't forgive you even if you apologize," Keith yelled, his first words laced with anger and a sneer. Dad silenced Mom, who was about to say something, and we sat opposite Keith's family. "What kind of upbringing did you give your daughter?" Keith, flanked by his parents, said imposingly. "That's right. Isn't it absurd for a housewife to stay out overnight, leaving her husband?" Yasmin interjected. My parents looked straight at Keith's parents. Then Dad said, "We've heard from our daughter. Could you please enlighten us about the money flow?" Their faces showed dismay at Dad's calm but forceful question. But they quickly responded, "So, we're doing a falal duty. What's wrong with that? A wife should understand, right?" Still, unapologetically, defending their actions. Using money lied about a family on wasteful expenses is considered falal piety in your family? Mom said, emotional. Keith retorted with disdain. "I'm making my parents happy, and that's for the family. After all, you're living off the money I earn. I even give you spending money." But Mom countered, holding back tears. "You took all her salary and gave her $10. Don't you feel anything?" "So," Yasmin cut off Keith's reply, "she married into our family. She should just obey. Housewives don't need spending money, complaining about her own faults and blaming others. How dare she bring her parents to complain? It's a privilege to receive anything from my son. With the eldest son gone, Keith is all we have left. Right, Dad?" "That's right. We don't need a stupid son like that," Yancy said, arms crossed. Keith, pleased with his parents' words, sneered. "Exactly. I'm the head of this household. Forget that traitor Richard. I'll protect Mom and Dad." That's when I realized why Keith had changed so suddenly. The affection from his parents, once solely for Richard, was now his due to Richard leaving. He was trying to regain the emotional nourishment he missed as a child. So he spent money as his parents dictated. He had become a child, not an adult building a home. "I can't do this anymore. I've reached my limit," I said quietly amidst their arguing. After a moment of silence, Keith scoffed. "What do you mean, can't? You want a divorce?" "Yes. I am not a slave to be exploited by you, nor a tool to appease your parents," I said calmly and presented the filled-out divorce papers on the table. Yasmin burst into laughter. "We don't mind. We were saying we should return such an impudent older wife. Come on out, dear." She looked towards the back. A young woman with a large belly appeared. "Keith's new wife. She's only 20, but a fine girl. She'll bear a proper heir, just as we wish." The young woman, with brown hair, showing black roots, and wearing fluorescent clothes, still with a touch of childishness, looked at me condescendingly, laughing just like Yasmin. Dad, who all along reached his breaking point. He was about to slam the table and stand up. I stopped him and said calmly, "So you were having an affair, is that correct?" Keith choked on his words at this, but I looked him in the eye and said, "Understood." Then Yasmin said, "I'll pay the compensation in the divorce trial, though, given your own faults, don't expect a large sum," still as assertive as ever. Yancy and Keith had faces that screamed machismo. Like Dad, fists clenched and eyes bloodshot with anger. Mom was trying to contain her fury. I nodded to her strongly and told the in-laws, "Actually, I've invited a guest myself," and pulled out my mobile phone. The one who appeared shortly after was Richard. "Richard?" Yasmin exclaimed in a strange voice. What are you doing here now, Richard? As Keith tried to stand, Yasmin leapt at Richard with such force. Her face was a picture of astonishment. You're back? Overjoyed, Yasmin grabbed Richard's hand, and he shook it off and said in a low voice, Mom, I've heard everything. Heard? What do you mean? Who told you? Behind Richard was a slender, beautiful woman, and further back, Renee. Renee and I exchanged glances. Richard, who are these people? They're my fiancée, Rebecca, and my friend, Renee. Fiancé? Richard, you're getting married? Mom didn't know. Yasmin, flustered, looked back and forth between Richard and his fiancée. Richard then came forward, sighed deeply, and bowed to me and my parents. I'm sorry for the trouble my brother and parents have caused, he said, bowing deeply. What? Why are you apologizing, Richard? Hey, you! What did you say to my son? As Yasmin lunged at me, I said, I've been on a call the whole time, letting Richard and the others listen outside, and showed the screen of my mobile phone. Yasmin glared at me with a terrifying look and tried to snatch the phone. But Richard shouted, Enough! And forcefully made her sit down. I'm sick of Mom's meddling and Dad's outdated favoritism towards the eldest son, ignoring the younger. I'd break if I'd stay here. As Richard overpowered the scene, the in-laws tried to speak, but Richard continued. I'm going to marry Rebecca and become part of the family. At Richard's words, Yasmin started causing a scene again. Become part of the family? How could you decide that on your own? While pulling away, Yasmin, who clung to Richard, Keith said soothingly, Mom, I'm here, aren't I? Who cares about Richard? But Yasmin shouted, You shut up, and pushed Keith away. Keith stood there, stunned. Richard, Mom won't forgive you. You won't leave Mom, right? You'll come back, won't you? Richard, shaking off Yasmin's clinging hands, looked her straight in the eye and said, I won't return to this house, and slowly let go of her hands. But Yasmin stubbornly grabbed Richard's arm. Richard, you're being deceived by this woman. Dad, stop Richard. That's right. He's the precious heir. Does an heir abandon his parents? As the in-laws shrieked, shaking Richard's shoulders, Rebecca, his fiancée, stepped forward and said, Excuse me, and then asked, You keep mentioning an heir, but do you have something to inherit? Her tone was devoid of any malice, merely posing a simple question. Her elegant demeanor left me and my parents speechless, while Renee was holding back laughter behind them. The room fell silent at Rebecca's words. Then Richard said, That's enough. Richard said this, placing his hand on the in-law's shoulders, then moved closer to Keith, who was sitting in a daze, and met his gaze. You see now, don't you? It's sad, but this is who our parents really are. You've had it rough since you were a kid, probably more so than me. Richard reached out to Keith's shoulder, but Keith shrugged it off. Don't joke with me. I've done nothing wrong. I am the representative of this family, he yelled weakly. Richard sighed at Keith's words and said firmly, Okay, I get it. But take full responsibility of what you've done. What you did to Yolanda is serious. What do you mean, take responsibility? Grabbing Keith's shoulders, Richard said in a gentle yet firm voice, After this, live your own life. And left the house, his arm around Rebecca's shoulder. As silence returned, my parents and I stood up and said, We will now discuss things through lawyers. And to Keith's mistress, who was so proudly rubbing her belly, I bowed sarcastically. Thank you for freeing Keith from threats and violence and his habit of giving all his earnings to his parents. What do you mean? She asked, following us. But we ignored her and left the in-laws' house. After that, the divorce was finalized through lawyers. Recordings of verbal abuse and medical reports worked in my favor. And despite the short marriage, I received a substantial compensation in the divorce. As for Keith's mistress, as suspected, the baby wasn't Keith's. The timing of the affair and the pregnancy didn't add up. But Keith, in his elation, didn't even notice. Of course, Keith and the in-laws were furious, and they divorced right after the child was born. They're still arguing over the divorce settlement and child support. On top of that, Keith had amassed a large debt from the money he gave his parents and the compensation to me. The in-laws, far from helping, berated him daily as the stupid son who lost his wife and is burdened with debt, and kept him in a small dark room, saving the largest room for when the eldest son returned. Renee came to Richard's and my in-laws' house because on the day we reunited, the conversation led to Richard being engaged to Rebecca, a friend from his college. Seeing me in tatters, she wondered if her friend may face the same fate immediately contacted Rebecca. But her worries were unfounded, as she was reassured by Richard's strong will. I was surprised by Rebecca's calm demeanor. Rebecca was born into a family with a long lineage and was the only daughter of a chairman who ran several companies. She found it strange that a regular salaried family, worried about an heir, kind of naive, but a really nice person, right? Renee laughed. Since then, Renee and I often meet for coffee and meals. I shudder to think, what would have happened to me if Renee hadn't been there that day? I really owe you one. Thanks to you, Renee. As I bowed my head, Renee said, "What are you saying?" But in a way, the biggest contributor was Rebecca, and laughed. I also laughed, remembering Rebecca's graceful manner at the time. I wish Richard and his wife happiness, but I can't say I hate Keith from the bottom of my heart. I feel sorry for Keith, who was blinded by the false love of his parents and taken advantage of and manipulated by them. Keith is a victim too. Thinking about that makes my heart ache. But as an adult, he should be able to distinguish between right and wrong. He should have the courage to accept his own need for love. It's no excuse for harassing the partner he chose for life. I too will work towards independence from now on. I quietly hope that one day Keith will find his way back to being an adult.
Please, contribute to my FIL's caregiving cost a bit. A call out of the blue from my estranged eldest son's wife, whose relationship with me had always been less than cordial. Her voice seeping through the phone was filled with unmistakable discontent and anger. Caught off guard, I found myself rapidly bombarded with her sharp, fast-paced accusations. Caught in the whirl of emotions, I was on the verge of a heated retort. But it turned out that we were misdirecting our anger. The true enemy for us was elsewhere. I'm Melissa, 72 years old. Up until a few decades ago, I was the mother of two, caught up in the whirlwind of parenting. But that feels like a distant past now. Both my eldest son and daughter, who once required so much of my attention, now have families of their own and are leading their own lives. As for me, I've been quietly spending my uneventful days for the past few years. I had no idea that a major incident was about to swoop in. It all started with a phone call. One day, just as I was about to prepare my lunch, my smartphone rang out of the blue. Who could that be? A quick look revealed it was my eldest son's wife, Sandra. It was an unusual occurrence. I froze for a few seconds with the phone in my hand. Ever since my eldest son, Daniel, got married, Sandra and I hadn't exactly been on good terms. An unexpected call from her. We've been drifting apart over the years. Actually, we haven't even contacted each other, let alone met, for more than a decade. Hello? I managed to stammer out a greeting, my voice shaking with an odd sense of tension, only to be met with an obviously disgruntled voice from the other end. MIL. It's been a while. This is Sandra. Her voice, low and imposing, didn't give me the leisure to feel nostalgic. It's been a while indeed. How have you been? Is there something you need? Honestly, she wouldn't have called me if she didn't have something on her mind. As I pondered this and asked, Sandra let out a small sigh before slowly and clearly speaking her piece. Yes, I'm calling about my FIL. What? Him? Why? Before I could finish my question, Sandra cut me off, raising her voice slightly. I understand that you have your own circumstances, MIL, but if this continues, we'll be in ruins. Ruins? What do you mean? As I expressed my confusion, Sandra continued with even more excitement in her voice. Please, contribute a bit to my FLL's caregiving costs. Caregiving cost? Her way of speaking was filled with an inexplicable anger towards me. The quick chatter seemed to foster the situation. I understand it's difficult. We also can't provide care due to our work commitments, and we feel bad about that. But despite giving so much already, to ask us to increase the monthly financial support, isn't that a bit outrageous? With each new topic, elder care, financial support, I was hearing words that were foreign to me. I was confused and hastily asked for clarification. Wait, elder care? For your FIL? What? Daniel's father. I'm talking about your husband. Her tone was almost mocking. Since the start of the phone call, I'd held my tongue, but her blatant attitude finally got under my skin. Excuse me, I don't have a husband. What? I unintentionally raised my voice. Perhaps my reaction or my response was unexpected. A silence ensued. I took a breath and spoke. Sorry for getting upset and coming off as rude, but it's true that I don't have a husband. I divorced him 10 years ago, so I'm single now. Didn't Daniel tell you? From the other side of the phone, I heard a gasp. She probably knew nothing about this. Something was off. The call seemed to be getting lengthy, so to hear the details, Sandra and I decided to meet after several years. The next day, we arranged to meet at a dinner. Seeing Sandra after so long, it's obvious we've both aged, but she seemed particularly worn out. I didn't remember her being so unkempt. After a brief greeting, I listened to her story, which went like this. Since their marriage under Daniel's direction, Sandra had consistently been sending a fixed amount of money to my ex-husband. 10 years ago, Daniel suggested they increase the amount they were sending. The reason being, my ex-husband needed elder care. Up until that point, Sandra had been sending quite a sum of money, so to send any more would be difficult, she protested. But Daniel told her, "We're almost 40, right? Yet we still don't have any children. Probably we won't be able to show our parents a grandchild, despite me being the firstborn. So at least let's support our parents financially as a form of final piety." Daniel and Sandra had married relatively late, so they had not been blessed with children yet. As a woman, I understood her anxiety. So I had never brought it up, but apparently Sandra felt quite guilty about this. And so she had agreed to increase the amount. At that time, I thought what Daniel said was right, so I agreed. But then, just recently, he told me we needed to increase it even more. Sandra was staring down and trembling. We're almost 50, and considering our retirement, we can't afford to give more, she protested to Daniel. Then, hearing the words that Daniel replied with, I felt like fainting. That idiot had the nerve to tell his own wife, You haven't served your duty as a wife, so at least you could provide money. What an awful thing to say. Oh, how pitiful. I couldn't say anything, but our finances are truly tight. So I ended up taking out my frustration on you, MIL. I apologize. I should be the one apologizing. I'm not sure how to make amends. As Sandra expressed her deepest apologies, I did the same without missing a beat. I had decided to have my son apologize at a later date, but there are still many things that do not make sense. Firstly, I've never received any cash from Daniel either before or after our marriage. I've never even heard of him giving me any form of allowance. Next, this is the first time I'm hearing that my ex-husband requires care. Speaking of 10 years ago, that was around the time we got divorced. But he was still fit as a fiddle back then. If something happened after the divorce, I should have heard about it from my oldest daughter. Moreover, according to Sandra, Daniel visits my ex-husband's house every weekend to help with his care. I tried going on my day off, but Daniel stopped me. He said, You don't need to come because Mom doesn't like you. What? Why on earth would Daniel keep our divorce a secret? As we continued talking, it became clear that there were a lot of misunderstandings between us. I thought Sandra didn't like me, and she thought the same about me. But it turns out the cause of all this was Daniel. Thinking back, Daniel used to tell me things like, Sandra said your cooking isn't good, or she really doesn't want to come over. That's why I always had a hard time with Sandra. Upon asking, it seems that Sandra felt the same way. She had heard from Daniel that I had said things like, I wanted someone younger, or she's not thoughtful or charming. The reason she stopped coming to our house was also because Mom doesn't like it, according to Daniel. But when we think back, neither of us remember saying much things. Right now, as we're talking face to face, I don't feel any hostility from Sandra towards me, so it seems like this was all caused by Daniel. What on earth was he thinking? Causing a rift between his wife and his mother? I decided to call Daniel first. Without touching on the main issue, I asked about the situation. Though Daniel seemed to be a bit annoyed, he responded normally. But as soon as I casually mentioned, By the way, how is Sandra doing? I'd love to catch up with you two sometime. His attitude changed completely. Suddenly, he became flustered and started to hang up the phone, saying he was busy. Even though I insisted on continuing the conversation, he lost his patience and yelled, Stop being so persistent! No wonder Dad divorced you. Even Sandra hates you. Can't you take a hint? Then he forcefully hung up the phone. He was clearly flustered. Of course he would be. He would be in trouble if Sandra and I met. After all, he even kept our divorce a secret from Sandra. There's no doubt he hung up the phone in a panic. Sandra's words started to feel more and more like the truth. Regrettably, if this is true, I don't think I can side with Daniel anymore. For now, leaving Daniel aside, I decided to contact my eldest daughter. It was to know about the current state of my ex-husband. As expected, my ex-husband was fit as a fiddle. This would mean that someone is lying. Daniel's expected, but the problem lies with the ex-husband. Is my ex-husband also in on the lie? Or maybe... After discussing with Sandra, we decided to explain to our eldest daughter that it was all because of something Daniel did, and asked her for cooperation. Since Daniel's birthday was coming up, we used that as a pretext. The plan was to celebrate his birthday as a family after a long time. My daughter invited Daniel and her family. Although I thought it was a bit forced, Daniel wasn't completely against the idea and responded with, "Really? At this age?" Apparently, he was more excited about it and said, "Don't forget my birthday present." What an easygoing son I have. According to my daughter, my ex-husband was excited to see me. Both were blissfully unaware of their impending judgment. Sandra and I had a thorough discussion, and we were prepared for that day. We decided to use my daughter's house for the meeting. Just in case, we asked my daughter's husband to stay in another room. In full readiness, we waited, and my ex-husband and Daniel arrived together. My ex-husband, who I hadn't seen in 10 years, saw me, and his face lit up as he rushed towards me. "Long time no see. Brings back memories." "Yeah, it's been a long time. You seem as lively as ever." You didn't seem to need any care at all. I said it with a touch of irony, but he misinterpreted it as a compliment and scratched his head in delight. "Yeah, people often tell me I don't look 70. You also look pretty good for your age. I think I might fall for you again." Hold on, that's creepy. I managed to swallow those words, which were on the tip of my tongue, and kept a smile on my face. Once we all sat at the table, my daughter poured the tea. I took a deep breath. "Now, shall we begin?" I glanced at Daniel, who was hungrily devouring the served tea and snacks, caught his eye, and started a conversation. "You're already 47, Daniel. Time flies, doesn't it? You're supposed to age." "Yeah, you've become a total granny, too." Daniel snorted, and my ex-husband corrected him. "What are you talking about? Your mom looks much younger than her peers." "That's true. There are many who need care at this age, right?" At my words, both Ken and my ex-husband looked flustered. A few seconds later, my ex-husband coughed awkwardly, trying to divert the conversation. "Well, I'm glad you seem well. I've always wanted to get in touch, but, you told me not to." "Yes, I'm doing well, thank you." I responded with a faint smile, and my ex-husband, seemingly relieved, began chatting away. "I'm glad to see you. In fact, I was thinking that today might be a good time to ask if we might spend our remaining years together." With those words, my ex-husband looked up at me with a sharp expression that seemed to have been somewhat prepared. Then, as if diverting a well-rehearsed punchline, he firmly stated, "Our remaining years together aren't going to be long. Let's live together." I wish he'd saved his dreams for when he was asleep. Looking at my ex-husband, who was gazing at me with sparkling eyes, I gave him a particularly bright smile and clearly told him, back before our divorce, I was nothing more than a maid. Now I'm to be a caregiver? Isn't that convenient? My ex-husband was taken aback. "Because you're in need of care now, aren't you?" I continued, which left him gaping. Where had his smug expression and overflowing confidence from moments ago gone? He turned to Daniel, who was sitting next to him with a face like a carp, looking for help. Daniel looked at me with his eyebrows twitching. What are you talking about? Dad and Mom are both still in good health, aren't they?" "Oh, is that so? Speaking of which, Daniel, I heard you've been visiting him every weekend recently. How fidel of you." Daniel stuttered. Yes, his mouth twitching. "That's right. I have a present for you. Partly as a birthday gift." As he brought my bag closer, I pulled out a file from it and handed it to him. Daniel took it in his hands, his eyes wide. This is... In the file Daniel was holding, there were several photos of him and an unfamiliar woman looking very intimate. These were all collected by the private investigator. It was strange for him to leave the house every weekend, even though there was no need for caregiving. So I decided to hire a PI along with Sandra. The result was damning. Daniel was meeting his mistress every week. He was caught off guard, and I was able to obtain a significant amount of evidence easily. Even the PI was amazed, saying, "It's rare for an investigation to be this easy." How about it? There, well taken, aren't they? Daniel, still holding the file, was trembling. Perhaps out of embarrassment, his face turned bright red. You've invaded my private life. Private? I was told you were brazenly walking around arm in arm. With a face as red as a beet, Daniel stared at the file. And? What happened with this lady? I asked, and Daniel hesitated for a moment before slamming the file down on the table and glaring at me. You know full well. That's right. She's my mistress. It's all because Sandra has lost her appeal. If I was satisfied with Sandra, I wouldn't be having an affair. His outrageously self-serving statement made me want to throw the tea in front of me at him. I couldn't believe my adorable son had turned into such a worthless man. Like father, like son, how pathetic. After all, the reason I divorced my ex-husband in the first place was his infidelity. My ex-husband had always had a habit of cheating. But with his smooth talk and persuasive words, I somehow ended up forgiving him. In the midst of all this, it was 10 years ago that we finally got a divorce. An affair came to light then, and the other party was a mutual acquaintance. Furthermore, it was revealed that my ex-husband had told his affair partner that the wife is just like a maid, so there's no love there. Thinking that I didn't want to spend the rest of my life with this man, I finally decided to get a divorce. Fortunately, I could get sufficient amount of property division, so I didn't have to worry about living expenses. When we got divorced, Daniel also said that it's impossible to have an affair, I said. What's impossible is getting caught. I was confident that I could handle it well, he replied. Yet he had the nerve to say this despite being caught. Even when I presented him with so much evidence, he showed no signs of remorse. I exaggerated on purpose, saying, even then, I received enough property division, which saved me. I wonder how much you will pay to your lady, Sandra. At this, Daniel visibly paled. Hold on, Mom, please. Don't tell her, please. He stumbled to his feet and knelt in front of me. You don't like Sandra either, right? I'm getting divorced, so please keep it to yourself. His pathetic groveling reminded me of my ex-husband. I won't tell, I said. Daniel looked relieved. As he began to say, Good, Mom, you understand, I called to the next room through the door. Because there's no need to tell. Right, Sandra? What? At that moment, Sandra, her face as ferocious as a guardian deity, appeared from the next room as the door was flung open. Daniel screamed pitifully and crumpled to the ground. What? Sandra! What? Why are you here? Wait, I'm so confused. My head is spinning. While he said this, Sandra strode over and stood imposingly in front of Daniel. Why? That's my line. What about the caregiving? The file piety? I heard everything from your mom. But, stammered Daniel, blinking rapidly, but Sandra wouldn't let him get a word in. I don't want your excuses. All the complaints you've made about your mother were lies, weren't they? What did you want to do? What joy did you get from driving a wedge between your wife and your mother? Overwhelmed by Sandra's fury, Daniel dropped to his seat, shaking his head vehemently. No, it's not like that. I just had a little shortage of pocket money, so I collaborated with my dad and said it was a remittance. When Sandra was puzzled, Daniel mumbled, If Sandra and Mom get along, it would be exposed immediately. That's why. In other words, it seemed he and his father had been using the money they claimed was a remittance. The reason for the increase in amount 10 years ago was due to the property division to me, which had left his father poorer. Yet his father still had some of his retirement money left, and they should have been able to maintain a normal life. When I pressed them, they hesitantly confessed. Apparently, they both had women they liked and had been giving them gifts. Upon learning the truth, Sandra let out a deep sigh and looked down at Daniel with eyes that were as disdainful as if she were looking at garbage. As you wish, let's get divorced. Also, all the money you lied about and took from our finances, I want it all back. Of course, it is apart from property division. What? But I don't have that kind of money. Sell your beloved, precious car. It can't be helped. You can pay the rest in installments. If you don't pay, I'll show up at your workplace. I'll also spread the word among our mutual friends. Oh, my beloved car? Daniel muttered, a hint of tears welling in his eyes. He glared fiercely at Sandra and raised a voice of protest. That's horrible! You're a monster! And to spread this around to my buddies, aren't you ashamed? You're admitting that you're a pitiful woman who got cheated on. Daniel! I instinctively tried to intervene, but Sandra stopped me. She squatted down to match the height of Daniel's face, and without blinking, she said, I haven't done anything to be ashamed of. I didn't lie, nor did I cheat. If I dare to say, I lacked judgment in men. I ended up marrying you. That's the only thing I'm ashamed of. Daniel, who was declared this at point-blank range, seemed to be at a loss for words. He flopped down on the floor, crying quietly. Sandra stood up with a slightly refreshed face and said, I'll consult with a lawyer later and contact you. Daniel didn't respond and just kept crying. In the end, he stayed like that for a while, even after Sandra and I returned home. It seemed that my ex-husband tried to cheer him up due to his deep depression, but he lashed out at him, saying it was his fault. Eventually, Sandra and Daniel divorced. As promised, it seems he's paying money back each month. To my surprise, Daniel came to me crying for help, but I turned him away at the door. There's a limit to being shameless. He also tried to get money from his mistress, but of course she refused. Apparently, she quickly abandoned him when he ran out of money. What's more, the mistress turned out to be a married woman. He seems to be in a hopeless situation. On a calm afternoon, over coffee at a cafe, Sandra said, He seems to be really concerned and contacts me every day, begging for help. He was crying on the phone the other day, too. Look, here he goes again. And showed me her smartphone where Daniel's name was listed repeatedly in the call history. When I replied, I'm sorry, honey, I raised him wrong. She gave me a bright smile. It's okay. It's not about how you raised him. It's genetic, isn't it? From your ex-husband? Ha ha! We looked at each other and laughed, agreeing, indeed. Now Sandra and I meet regularly to catch up. We've become best friends, a far cry from our MIL and DIL days. I wish we had become like this sooner, but it can't be helped. It's all due to that good-for-nothing ex-husband and son. Rather than regretting the wasted time, we have to enjoy what's to come. There's still a lot of life ahead of us, right, Sandra? I raised my coffee cup, and Sandra smiled and raised her cup as well. Yes, absolutely, Melissa. And we both laughed again, clinking our coffee cups in a small toast.